He's done that in a number of different positions. Seems like maybe he's trolling a little bit just to freak you out. And I'm not sure if...
For many people, mission accomplished.
I'm not sure if, the Senate has to approve these people, and it doesn't look like that's going to be the case for most.
Of course, the incoming Senate Majority Leader says maybe they could just bypass that process altogether.
Right, but every single Republican has to agree to recess appointments, or else it's not going to happen. In any case, we have a lot going on in the markets. We have a lot going on in politics. And then in just the broader news, we have Elon Musk's SpaceX, at least according to the FT, may sell shares at a valuation of $250 billion. So there's that caught my eye. And did you see that, speaking of Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky says the war in Ukraine will end quicker with Trump in power.
Yeah, but to whose advantage? How much real estate are they going to have to give
He didn't qualify it. He just said it is more likely to end quickly. We have a number of guests for you today, from Geetha Ranganathan to Brooke Sutherland to Nora Melinda. She is here with us in the Bloomberg, the Interactive Brokers studio, and you're going to give us the rundown on the big stocks movers. Nora, what have you got?
I mean, I've got quite a bit for you. I mean, the market is lower, as you said. We're seeing a sell-off as we're reversing from that rally that we saw last week. I'm keeping an eye on Applied Materials. So we do know that this is the largest U.S. maker of chips. It's suffering its worst decline in a month after giving a disappointing revenue forecast. This is really a sign for a lot of semiconductor customers that they could be holding off on orders. And this has really been in focus today. We're seeing it as the biggest percentage decliner in the S&P 500 right now, down as much as 10%, but on a year-to-date scale, we're seeing shares up 5%. I'm also keeping an eye on healthcare stocks. I mean, I think that's really been in focus after news that President-elect Donald Trump said that he's tapping RFK Jr. to run the Department of Health and Human Services. As we know, he has really been a big skeptic as we think about vaccines and things of that nature, but he is positive and does like psychedelics. So we are seeing shares of psychedelics rising. Companies like Mind Medicine.
Who doesn't like psychedelics? Let's be honest. I mean,
I didn't expect this today.
Shrooms on a Saturday.
Fun for my Friday, right? But we're seeing shares like Mind Medicine and Compass Pathways rising on the news. But of course, we do see vaccine developers like Moderna, second biggest decliner in the S&P 500 right now, down 7%. And Pfizer, Novavax also falling in sympathy. But last but not least, I wanted to give you a stock in the green. Palantir Technologies, that's ticker PLTR. That's the biggest gainer in the S&P 500 right now. And this is coming after news that the company said that it will be transferring its listing to the NASDAQ from the New York Stock Exchange. We do know that this is a software solutions developer, and it has really been growing on that AI hype, surging more than 270% in this year alone.
What's the advantage of relisting somewhere else?
What's the advantage? I mean, I think that it really depends on who you're trying to target, but investors seem to be hoping that it will gain from funds being forced to buy its shares.
Gotcha. Okay, Nora Melinda with some of the stocks. Under the hood, did we go to Charlie Pellet yet?
We didn't. I didn't see Charlie, and he didn't like poke his head out from behind that column.
Right.
That's because he's not here, I'm told.
What? From where does Charlie typically read his updates? Isn't he usually right over there behind the column?
Yeah.
All right, well, we missed him. That's no big deal. We'll get back to him. I'll just say for him, stand clear of the closing doors.
Right.
Nora, thanks very much for that. Let's get over to Dave Peacock. He's the CEO of Advantage Solutions. He joins us live from St. Louis, Missouri, and we want to talk a little bit about retail sales and the economic data that we got in this morning. Dave, I see retail sales coming in stronger than anticipated on the headline, but if you take out cars, they're weaker. Cars and gas, they're weaker. What's your view?
Yeah, we're seeing, I'd say, a resilient consumer, but at the same time, a little bit sluggish, especially in the space where we work, which is food and personal care primarily, the retail sector. And some of that is because of the 22% higher prices for groceries that you've seen kind of coming out of the pandemic, while wages are catching up with that. I think for certain consumers, it's forced them to go value seeking.
Are we still way above pre-pandemic levels as far as things like that, the stuff that I actually use and eat?
We are. So depending on the category, but overall, groceries are around 22% higher than they were pre-pandemic.
As far as promotions, I want to set the table for Thanksgiving. Should I just stick to promotions, the things that are discounting?
You know, our proprietary research, the advantage we've got says that 40% of shoppers are going to either pull back or trade down as they shop for the holidays. So when we look at trading,
trade down from a turkey, though.
well, size, to be honest, because it's sold per pound. So you might actually see people buy a smaller turkey. You also have different price points if it's frozen or fresh. And then if you look at the other items in the store, you're seeing private label products growing in the retail sector while national brands are flattish to declining a bit.
So rather than go with the Butterball, you look at the Kirkland turkey. Are consumers trading down still from, name brand stores? I'm not going to go to Chico's. I'm more likely to go to Costco. Is that the case with everybody else?
You're continuing to see channel shift into the value segment, into the club stores, into mass merch. And so, yeah, you are seeing that channel shift with some consumers.
Are you seeing the discounting? I mean, John mentions it. He's always on the lookout for a sale. But are producers offering discounts more than they normally would around this season?
You know, you're seeing continued discounting, but if you look at percent of volume within the grocery store more broadly sold on deal or sold on promotion, we're still actually a little bit below pandemic levels. So what consumers are doing to value seek is some are looking for promotions, but at a lower rate overall than pre-pandemic, but they are looking at private label and they are looking at different channels where prices can be lower.
If retail sales are up in this period, does that mean debt is also up? Are they putting it on credit cards? Do you measure that?
You are seeing credit card balances increase and increase somewhat dramatically. When you look at items like food and personal care, they tend to be within the normal budget on a month-to-month basis for most consumers. And so where you're seeing debt creep up potentially is things like higher value durable goods.
This is a question for both of you. Who can afford a new car these days?
Well,
I mean, it's not average.
I'll just step in.
It's not the average Joe,
John,
right?
I'll just step in, John, and say Bloomberg News did a great story last week pointing out that even, the top quintile is finding it difficult to afford a new car and therefore looking at used cars. That's why, you see the retail number, retail sales advancing month over month, 0.4%. We were only looking for 0.3%. So it's doing well. Then you look at the ex-auto number and it's doing poorly. And I guess that's because the price of new cars is just so high. Is that the case, Dave?
I think that's the case. And you're looking at dollar increases. And so pricing plays a factor. So one thing that we look at, because we operate in the retail space, so grocery stores, convenience stores, mass merch. But if you look at restaurants, you saw, I think, 0.7% in the service sector growth. But pricing overall in food away from home has been growing at 3+ times the rate of food at home recently. So food at home prices have been going up around 1.5% the last year. And food away from home and restaurants has been closer to 3.5 to 4.
But on the durable goods, do you see prices of other, big ticket items like appliances as high as they are with automobiles?
Yeah, you're seeing pretty inflated pricing. And I don't know because we don't work in the automobile space, but the question would be how much inventory are dealers holding and what kind of deals are being offered by both dealers and manufacturers to get product off these lots.
Going forward, are retailers confident that they can still pass costs along to consumers?
Yeah, I think it's to some degree, and it's really a question of manufacturers more than retailers, because retailers are often the one receiving the pricing. There are commodities, depending on what you're making, what food you're providing, what personal care item, for instance, that are still increasing or still at elevated levels. And so, cocoa and chocolate is a good example of that. And we saw that during Halloween, and it certainly suppressed some of the volume during the Halloween window. So people are going to pass it on when they have to, but I think they're more reticent given the economic realities.
What does all this mean for the holiday shopping season?
It's a short season, right? So we have a late Black Friday, we have a late Thanksgiving, and so the season will spread over 22 or so days versus 34. And I think it'll be interesting to see how supply chains hold up relative to a more compressed demand. 63% of shoppers, based on our research, indicate they're going to shop a little earlier. So we may be seeing some of that creeping in earlier in November. So it'll be interesting to see where the retail sales come out for the next month.
Hey, can you address for us the divide between the haves and have-nots and what the overall retail picture looks like right now?
When you say have and have-nots, do you mean by retailer or by consumer?
Well, we'll do both, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing, let's look at the consumer, because I think everything starts there. What we see is, lower income consumers are really kind of strained in this economy, especially with the elevated grocery prices we talked about, which are a day-to-day item. And so they're the ones that are going to different channels. They may be pulling back a bit on their purchases, which is why you're seeing slower volume. And they are looking at private label products. On the upper end, one thing, at least in the food space where we operate, you are seeing for some is GLP-1 drugs. As much as 15% of a company's pharmaceutical expenses within their benefits plans can be going now to GLP-1 drugs, depending on the company. It's not saying it's everywhere. But there is belief that it is having an impact on demand, especially for that higher end consumer that can afford those medications.
Yeah, I can't afford them, but I can't wait to get my hands on some Wegovy or Ozempic.
Doesn't your healthcare plan pay for that?
They won't. They say I'm not fat enough yet, but
what about me?
I'm doing my best. John Tucker, we can both try and find it from an unregistered pharmacy. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. Dave Peacock there, the CEO of Advantage Solutions, coming to us from St. Louis, Missouri, talking about retail sales and food inflation. Now, we missed Charlie Pellet at the top of the show because, frankly, we're filling in and have no idea what we're doing. But I see Charlie.
And plus, he wasn't here.
I see Charlie back here in the studio behind the pole. Charlie, what do you got?
I got an update on markets, and here's what's going on. With a lot of red on this Friday here. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all declining. S&P right now down 69, 58.80 where we stand. That is a drop right now of 1.2%. Dow Industrials down 264, a decline now of 0.6%. NASDAQ down 376, a drop there of 2%. Your 10-year. 4.45% with the 2-year, 4.31%. Gold up $7 the ounce, up 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, 68.54 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin right now 89,050, up today by 1%. Federal Reserve Bank of Boston President Susan Collins says a December interest rate cut remains on the table, emphasizing the central bank's decision will be guided by incoming data. She made the remark in a conversation aired right here on Bloomberg Radio.
The economy's in a very good place right now, and inflation's coming back down to target. The labor markets are healthy. We're seeing solid growth. The goal of policy is really to sustain that healthy set of conditions, recognizing, there are risks on both sides. And so I think we're well positioned. I certainly wouldn't take another ease in December off the table.
Boston Fed President Susan Collins interviewed right here on Bloomberg Radio. This update brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you very much, Charlie Pellet. That's what we had been missing, and I'm sure glad we got it.
That really sets the pace for us, doesn't it?
Well, you know what? It's, I think, a very high volume day on this sell-off. So right now we're looking at double the volume we typically see at this time of day on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, off 250 points. So not a huge drop. It's just a little more than 0.5%.
But I mean, you're latching onto the Fed theme, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that it wasn't telegraphed in some way. I mean, you knew this economy was on fire, and employment was pretty full. 4% unemployment, 3% GDP growth is much better than a stick in the eye. So, and I don't see where Fed policy was especially restrictive with S&P 6,000 and the tightest credit spreads we've seen since 1998.
And yet yields, the 2-year, down 3 basis points.
Yeah, well, but the 2-year is at 236 still, right? And we're looking at a 10-year that's at
13.
or sorry,
I wish.
sorry, 436, right? And we're looking at a 10-year that's at 445. So there's not even that big of a slope on the curve right now. I just think, you know, these higher yields are pricing in more of a premium and an expectation for inflation to come, which means the Fed can't be really cutting rates right now. Not to the extent that we thought they were going to a few weeks ago.
You know what we have just ahead? Munis. Munis in focus.
Bam!
And I am told that one of the things under consideration, the elimination of the tax advantage for munis. I mean, how devastating would that be for the market?
Well, maybe, you know, along with a lot of these policy changes that you may see coming up, devastating in the short term, better in the long term. You know, there are too many tax advantages. There are too many deductions. There are too many loopholes. That's what keeps the swamp full, right? If they really want to drain the swamp, just instate a flat tax for everybody and cut out any kind of loophole and deduction. At least that's the theory that I hear from some on the right. We'll see what Donald Trump has the stomach to actually push through. When we come back, we're going to give you more market reaction to Jay Powell's speech yesterday and to Donna Collins that we heard from, Susan Collins that we heard from the Michael McKee interview just about an hour ago. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, and we are looking at a down Friday. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red right now. 67-point drop on the S&P. We're off session lows, but still down 1.1%. The S&P standing right now at 58.81. Dow Industrials down 253, decline now of 0.6%, while NASDAQ down 1.9%, down 365 points. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping now by 1%. Stocks and treasuries falling as Trump trades lose steam. Also, investors are betting that the Fed will have to slow the pace of policy easing. 10-year, 4.45%. The 2-year, 4.31%. Gold up 0.1%, 25.68 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 68.46 a barrel. And Bitcoin now up 1.1%, 89,166. Sources tell Bloomberg General Motors will be cutting about 1,000 salaried workers globally in a move to streamline its operations. Those sources say most of the layoffs will affect staff in North America. GM shares down 0.3%, rival Ford down 0.4%, and Stellantis shares little change, down less than 0.1%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
Focus on Munis is brought to you by BAM.
BAM!
Mutual insures municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be a part of building America. Invest in
BAM!
BAM insured bonds. Man, me and Paul one time did a show down from Build America Mutual, and it was a fantastic experience. Got to meet all the guys that were working there, got to really immerse ourselves in the muni market, which I love to do. We'll continue that right now with Bloomberg Municipal Bond reporter Max Adler. He joins us on Zoom out of Los Angeles. And Max, before we get to any of the specific stories on your radar right now, I want to ask about the potential to remove the tax advantage of munis. John mentioned it earlier on. How likely is that to happen?
Well, thanks for having me. It's going to be tough to follow up that fabulous ad read. But on the tax exemption, we don't think it's that likely. It's definitely something that's been floated. We have all of these potential tax cuts that the Trump administration is going to try to push through. They're going to try to extend the TCJA. And this has been floated as a possible way to make up some of the tax revenue that would be lost. But we don't think it's that likely. Trump does have a lot of finance people in his corner. Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald, they have some muni holdings. I would not think that he'd be advising Trump to get rid of the muni tax exemption. And the federal government hasn't proven that it can make up for the infrastructure demands that municipal bonds take care of. Right now, munis fund about 75% of the infrastructure projects that are built in the U.S. So there definitely would be a problem financing a lot of those infrastructure projects if the tax exemption was done away with.
Yeah, they'd have to turn to the taxable market. I mean, how likely is that?
Yeah, I don't know if that would be particularly likely. We do think that the taxable market would expand a little bit if Trump does get his tax cuts through. That would lessen the value of the muni tax exemption to some extent, especially in bigger tax states. But yeah, no, we don't think it's particularly likely that all of the country's infrastructure needs would be met by the taxable market.
All right, so it's not likely, but this is one of the ways he could make up for lost revenue from the tax cuts. What kind of shape are the municipalities in right now? Because a few years ago they were just swimming in cash and didn't really need to issue too much debt anyway. How do they look currently?
They're showing some signs of strain, especially in bigger cities. We see a lot of different transit agencies right now are having a lot of problems that started before the COVID pandemic and was exacerbated during the pandemic. You're seeing San Francisco is having some signs of budget strain. Chicago has been talked about a lot. They're having a lot of problems funding their public schools and just with revenues in general. So a lot of cities are showing some signs of strain, especially now that some of the federal stimulus that was injected into the cities during COVID is drying up.
All right, let's talk about sports stadiums. Tropicana Field was pretty much destroyed by, what was it, Hurricane Milton. But it's Munis to the rescue, or is it?
Probably not. It's actually the team that is likely to be covering the cost of this. So as part of their lease agreement with the city of St. Petersburg, they don't pay anything in rent pretty much, but they are on the hook for any maintenance costs and the cost of repairing the stadium right now. And as you said, the roof of Tropicana Field was entirely ripped off during Hurricane Milton. They have about $55 million in damages. The Rays have been contributing to this escrow account essentially over the length of their lease, which has almost been like 27 years at this point. So there is money in that account that they'll then use for the repairs. But it won't be a Muni-funded repair project.
Okay, so I saw the story where the Rays, of course, they're moving to Steinbrenner Field. The Yankees are going to let them use their spring training facility, but the worry was, will everybody fit in there? And given the average fan base, yeah, they're not going to have any problems moving into a much smaller stadium.
By the way, if people have invested in that kind of paper in the past, financing stadiums and the like, how well do those investments typically do?
They typically pay off pretty well. There's like a lot of demand for that paper as well. There are a lot of like affinity buyers that want to come in and buy credits of names that they know pretty well. It happens with universities. It even happens with smaller schools. There was a private school out here in LA, the Curtis School. Their bond sold out really well, and that was mostly like affinity buyers. But stadiums in particular do get a lot of those affinity buyers. It reminds me of a recent deal that the city of Buffalo, actually Erie County, where Buffalo is located, was marketing recently. They were trying to sell Bills bonds, as they were calling them. And that deal also was pretty well subscribed. It didn't draw as much retail demand as they expected, but certainly the institutional investors stepped up.
All right, Max, thanks so much for joining us. Max Adler there, Bloomberg Municipal Bond Reporter out of Los Angeles. Let's shift gears a little bit to politics, or at least large corporate involvement in politics. Brooke Sutherland joins us, Bloomberg's Boston bureau chief. She's also the writer of the Industrial Strength newsletter, and she has a story out on the Terminal entitled "Nobody Knows What's Going to Happen. CEOs Brace for More Trump." Brooke, it's interesting. You kick off the story talking about how corporate leaders just really didn't want the same thing that the American public wanted, and that is Donald Trump in a second term.
Yes, I mean, I think, if you look at a lot of the policies that he has proposed, they're not necessarily pro-business. Of course, you have the prospect of lower regulation, lower taxes. Those are the types of things that businesses love to hear. But you also have the possibility of a trade war and, a reignition of inflation, which is not helpful for business leaders. And then, there's also just the chaos factor, the possibility of governance by tweet returning and becoming sort of a commonplace thing. I think we all forget a little bit about what exactly it was like during Trump's first term, but he would rather frequently target specific companies who he was frustrated for whatever different reason. And that creates a lot of volatility, a lot of instability for these companies that really crave predictability and like to make their decisions on a playing field that they understand and can anticipate.
On the other hand, did you hear Jamie Dimon talking to Lisa Abramowitz yesterday?
Yeah, terrific.
From the APEC summit in Peru. He said bank leaders, whether they voted for Trump or Kamala Harris, were dancing in the streets. He was pretty upbeat, Brooke.
Well, I think it might depend on what industry you're in. I mean, I think banking is certainly one that expects to see a lot of relief on the regulatory front, and probably would be less likely to be directly affected by anything like tariffs. Whereas manufacturers, even those with substantial U.S. manufacturing operations, it's extremely rare for those companies to have entirely domestic supply chains. They like to talk a lot about local for local manufacturing, but what that means is North America in terms of supplying their U.S. operations. It's not necessarily just America. And so a lot of these companies rely on raw material or component imports to some extent. And all of that could potentially be vulnerable under the tariffs that Trump has proposed. Now, there is a sense that, some of this is perhaps bluster. It's a negotiating tactic that, the policies that he's put out there, whether it's 60% tariffs on China goods, up to 100% tariffs on goods from Mexico, 10 to 20% on everybody else, that these are not necessarily the final destination. It's, meant to be more sort of a negotiating tactic. And if that is the case, then, I think a lot of these companies have shown an ability to be adept and pivot their supply chains, but I think it's very unpredictable right now, and it's not entirely clear what his goals are. And he has focused a lot on Mexico. And if you look at Mexico, that really was one of the biggest beneficiaries of the tariffs from his last term, because a lot of companies who had supply chains in China decided to bring those back to North America, but they didn't put them in the U.S. They put them in Mexico, which has seen, a really big boom in spending specifically by manufacturing.
Yeah, is there really a cost-effective way for companies to bring their stuff back to the United States?
Well, to do it effectively, you have to have robots or automation. And, there are some industries for which that works better, for which it, makes more sense to invest in automation. And there are others for which it is much trickier. And, some of the companies that have been investing in Mexico are doing so in part because they really struggle to find the labor that they need in the U.S. And so, whether or not you have automation, just getting the people that you need can be very challenging. And even now, as we've seen sort of some of these labor shortages ease, you still hear manufacturers talking all the time about how difficult it is to get a quality workforce. And it's important to remember that this was a challenge for the industry even before the pandemic, which certainly exacerbated things. But this has been sort of a long-standing issue in the U.S. Factory jobs tend to be very rigid. There's no work from home. They tend to operate on like a very set schedule, and that is not appealing to a lot of the American population.
Yeah, it's, I think, a fascinating story and a fascinating topic. I just spoke with Peter Rawlinson, the CEO of Lucid, and we were asking him if he was bummed about maybe losing the tax credit or the fact that his chief rival, Elon Musk, is like best friends with Donald Trump now. And he pointed out, hey, we build and produce our products here in the United States of America, and I think Donald Trump wants to keep manufacturing here.
One of the things that CEOs and investors always want is certainty. It doesn't sound like from
that's true,
Brooks
and that's
reporting that they're getting much of it right now.
I think Brooke's main point. Brooke, thanks so much for joining us. Definitely recommend you read the story. Nobody knows what's going to happen. CEOs brace for more Trump. On that note, we're getting a report from the Wall Street Journal that Donald Trump is considering tapping Fox Business Network host Larry Kudlow to either run the NEC, again, as he previously has, or lead the Treasury Department as secretary amidst a Cold War between Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks in the red, not just lower, but very close to session lows right now, with the S&P down 73, a decline of 1.2%, 58.76 where we stand on that index. The Dow down 315, down 0.7%, a 2% drop right now for the NASDAQ Composite Index. Right now we've got NASDAQ down 372 points. The Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares lower by 1.1%. 10-year yield at 4.46%. The 2-year 4.31%. Gold down 0.1%. Little change now, down $1.50, 25.63. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.2%, 67.86 a barrel. And Bitcoin now up 1.1%, 89,224 on Bitcoin. U.S. retail sales advanced in October, and with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Autos led the way. Online sales gained as well, possibly reflecting discounting during Amazon's Prime Day and similar promotions at Walmart and Target. Other sectors also showed momentum heading into the holiday shopping season. However, forecasts so far suggest inflation-strapped consumers may pull back. Meantime, a separate report shows import prices rose for the first time in 4 months in October. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And Vinny mentioned Amazon down now by 3.7%. Target shares down 0.3%. Walmart shares right now lower by 0.2%. So again, recapping here, U.S. stocks lower on this Friday. S&P down 75, down 1.3%. The 10-year 4.46%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks very much for that. Charlie Pellet with your Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, we had seen shares of Tesla and Rivian sliding yesterday on a report that Trump plans to axe the $7,500 EV tax credit put in place under the Biden administration. You do see Tesla shares bouncing back a bit today. They're up 3.5% after falling 5.8% yesterday. Rivian, though, still down, and I spoke earlier this morning with the CEO of Lucid, Peter Rawlinson. His shares are off another 4% today after falling 5% yesterday and have hit an all-time low at less than $2. Lucid trading for $1.99 a share. I want to bring in Steve Mann, Bloomberg Intelligence Global Autos and Industrial Research Manager. And Steve, I guess the main question, how will the EV industry be affected by the Trump administration? It looks like, wait,
no microphone for Steve.
Steve, have you muted yourself? Can you unmute yourself? I don't know if you've got a button around
I don't think it's back there.
Maybe his microphone pack had turned off. If we can get an audio engineer out to Steve Mann, that would be fantastic. All right, we've got him back. So, Steve, I'll ask again from the top here. How will the EV industry be affected by the Trump administration?
Yeah, if Trump decides to kind of remove or cut the $7,500 tax credit or EV tax credit, I think most people believe that the EV penetration will stall. If not stall, it will probably fall. Because a lot of the consumers are relying on that $7,500 to make sure, to bring down the price, the effective price of the vehicle. Most EVs sold in America are still very expensive. There's only a limited number of them that are under $50,000. So the fear is, it's going to stall EV penetration. The automaker is going to have a hard time because they've already invested. They've already committed to investing a lot of money under the Inflation Reduction Act, about over $150 billion to onshore a lot of the supply chain. So it's going to cause a lot of chaos within the industry.
So they'll be under no pressure whatsoever moving forward, possibly to increase sales of EVs.
Yeah, I think the automakers are going to have to increase incentives. I think what could happen if the EV penetration rate does decrease from about 8% currently in the U.S., you're gonna be left with the strongest players. And that, to me, that looks like it's Tesla, because Tesla does have the lowest cost structure amongst all the EV makers in the U.S. And if the market shrinks, the weaker ones will probably fall on the wayside.
And oddly enough, first bro, or what do we call him, first friend, Elon Musk, he's not necessarily in favor of these tax subsidies for EVs.
Yeah, I think, to him, he thinks Tesla doesn't need them. And it's partly true. If you look at the amount of cars that are leased and eligible for the 7,500, actually a lot of the 7,500 tax credit is actually from leased vehicles. If you look at the amount of leased vehicles that Tesla have sold in the past 12 months, it's about 20%. So they'll get impacted. But if you compare it to Rivian, Rivian has about 50% of their vehicles leased, and those and eligible for the 7,500. So it could be a bigger impact in Rivian, and that's probably why you're seeing their stock falling much more.
Yeah, there's a limit on you don't get the tax credit if you're buying a vehicle that costs more than $80,000, and I believe there's a household income requirement as well. You have to be below a certain level. But if you lease it, you can get around at least one part of that tax credit. Isn't that right, Steve?
That's right. That's actually what I'm referring to. So when we look at the companies who's going to get impacted, we really look at, how many of those vehicles are leased. If you look at EVs in general in the U.S., the leasing penetration is actually upwards of 75, 80, 90%. So a lot of people that actually buy EVs are leasing it to get that $7,500.
What does the EV market look like right now? I mean, I know if you read the headlines, you would think that no one has bought an EV this year. Like, the industry's in trouble because they're so unpopular, not just politically, but, since they're difficult to charge for a lot of people, it's just not an option. However, don't we still see EV sales actually growing?
Oh, we are. We are seeing EV sales growing, especially in the second half of this year, because there's been a lot of price cuts, right, over the past 18, 24 months in the industry. And a lot of these vehicles have become more affordable. And even, especially in the used EV market, those vehicles are very competitive to gasoline cars. What the industry is really facing is it's affordability, and it's getting more impacted by the fact that interest rates are high. A lot of people cannot afford expensive cars these days, and EVs are a little bit more expensive than ICE at the moment. So what the industry was trying to do, and I think what the IRA was trying to do, was trying to onshore a lot of the production, onshore a lot of the supply chain in the U.S. in hopes of bringing costs down, so automakers can offer more affordable EVs. And that's what we were expecting. We were actually expecting the EV penetration rate to rise, especially into 2026 and 2027.
Well,
when
Steve,
more
I
of those
got to break in here because I feel
online.
like, Americans have shown a propensity for taking on $1,000 plus monthly payments. I don't think it's about the price, frankly.
Where do you charge it? That's my concern.
That's the big problem. I'm test driving right now a GMC Sierra EV. It is a fantastic vehicle. It's expensive, but I think a lot of people are willing to take on debt to own a car like that. The problem is there's nowhere to charge it. I park in a garage across the street in Manhattan, capital of the world, and the only option they offer is the slowest potential charge for $20 a day. So it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Affordability is not the only hurdle. It's the charging and the range. And, depending on the use, I think a lot of people with a second vehicle may get an EV. Someone who's using it for daily commutes may get an EV. But, America's a big country, and people love to drive cars, and there are a big majority of car buyers that are probably staying away from EVs because of that.
All right, Steve, great update. We got to hang out, man. I need to talk to you a little bit more. Steve Mann there, Bloomberg Intelligence Global Autos and Industrial
Steve, not me.
Research Manager. He knows more about cars than you do. and that's what I want to wrap with him about. So we're looking at a market that continues to decline on this Friday, falling away from the record highs we hit. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Matt Miller here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio with John Tucker. Neither Alex Steele nor Paul Sweeney are here, and we're doing our best.
We're trying. And you know what? They probably won't have any listeners or viewers when they get back.
You know, I know that you have plans tonight.
We were just talking about.
You're an
this
empty
in the break.
nester,
Yeah.
right? You're gonna
sort
hit
of.
the town with some Wall Street bigwigs. I, however, have little kids at home, so I don't get to go out. But I'm excited nonetheless because Iron Mike Tyson, a 58-year-old man, is preparing to knock out a 27-year-old punk on Netflix. And there's no way I'm going to miss that. Geetha Ranganathan joins us right now, Bloomberg intelligence analyst for U.S. media, and she covers, of course, Netflix as well out of Princeton, New Jersey.
Wait, is he really expected to win this thing?
Mike Tyson? He's not going to lose a boxing match
He's
to...
58.
All right, Geetha, I don't know if you got the odds on the fight, but what is this event? I hadn't really realized it was going to be on my TV until I started reading the news this morning.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been so much buzz building up for this matchup. It's been heavily promoted, heavily hyped. And I mean, regardless of whether Mike Tyson or Jake Paul, regardless of who wins that, I mean, obviously the big winner in either case is going to be Netflix. You know, they have over 280 million subscribers all across the world. This is by far their biggest foray into live sports. And remember, they're really trying to build a business here from scratch, that business being the advertising business. And you need eyeballs for that. And they know they will get the eyeballs with this matchup.
So how many people signed up just to see this match tonight?
So we are, we've obviously, I think everybody who wants a Netflix subscription already kind of has one. But, for those who probably don't have one, I think this is obviously going to give them that impetus to join. And we think it'll actually end up triggering a lot more subscribers to go on the advertising tier, which is one of the cheaper options out there at $7 a month. And that's actually what Netflix really wants, because at the end of the day, they want to kind of build up that viewer base so that they can sell ads against that. So we're actually projecting that, Netflix over the course of the entire quarter will actually end up adding about more than 10 million subscribers, which is a really healthy number for the fourth quarter.
I remember the conversation my brother had with my father way, way, way back when to get cable. The great thing about cable, they don't have any ads on it. How quickly that changed.
Yeah.
And now it's changing for streaming.
Streaming as well. Geetha, the main question, and I don't know if you're read in on this, that I have is it a real fight? Is it a setup? I mean, are these two really going to go at each other, no holds barred?
It's a real fight. This is not WWE where it's staged. So it's a real fight. I mean, I know all the bets are out there. So, everybody's excited.
Yeah, I'm pumped.
This gives you some indication of just boxing in general. Can you name who is the world heavyweight champion right now?
No idea. But I also don't really know who Jake Paul is. So I'm not caught up on non-financial news. In terms of entertainment, the only thing I know is what drives money making and streaming. And Squid Game is one of those things, Geetha. I think a ton of people watched this, and my sense is you had to get to the end, and when you did, you realized what an incredibly depressing, disappointing letdown. I never want to go through something like that again. I would pay money not to watch Squid Game again. But Netflix is going to bring out another season of this. Is it going to do well, or have we all learned our lesson?
Oh, it's going to be gangbusters. I mean, Squid Game 1 was by far the most watched series for Netflix ever. And why that's surprising is because this is a non-English series. I mean, this came out of Korea. It was made for, you have series here that are made for something like 300, 400 million. This entire series was made for something like less than 20 million when it first came out. So it just kind of showed how, hits can be generated anywhere, how content can resonate across the globe. And Netflix will obviously go all out on the second season, just kind of knowing how much of buzz and how much of anticipation has been built already, after the first season launched.
So the Korean producers this time, are they charging Netflix a premium for this programming?
I'm absolutely sure that they are.
Apparently, listen, dude, apparently the writer, and Geetha, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I read the other day or heard from Katie or Shanali, the writer lost 7 or 8 teeth because the production process was so stressful. Is that true?
I read the same thing. Yeah. I mean, obviously they went all out. Yes, it is true. And I saw the same thing as well.
I lost 10 teeth when they told me I had to co-host with Matt today.
Dude, I haven't lost teeth since the 4th grade. How do you lose teeth?
I guess it's a stress thing.
And I chew tobacco for 30 years. All right, Geetha Ranganathan, thanks so much for joining us. She is a Bloomberg Intelligence analyst on U.S. media and Netflix. If nothing else, at least you know from listening to us on Bloomberg Radio today that there's something to watch on Netflix today. Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul, who I guess is
You're going to watch this with your kids tonight?
Or, that's a good question. What time does this thing actually start? I have no idea, but I'm assuming it's past their bedtime. Does anybody in the control room know when the Mike Tyson? No one knows. Well, we'll figure it out, and I'll put the kids to bed no matter what. All right. What a fantastic hour. What a great treat it's been spending time with you.
Lost 10 teeth.
And I was less worried about the markets. On TV, I'm more worried, right? We're down 1 1/3% on the S&P 500 at 5870. Wow, earlier this week we were up above 6,000, and the 10-year yield approaching 450. Balance of power starts right now. This is Bloomberg.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. Murder trial in Georgia underway today in the case of the Venezuelan man charged with killing student Laken Riley last winter. A death that fueled the national debate about immigration. CBS's Jared Eggleston.
That first witness, one of Laken's roommates, about how they tracked each other on a Find My Friends app the day of that murder. This is just one of the pieces of evidence this morning, including that 911 call, which came out in court where Laken was trying to call 911 during the attack. Jose Ibarra, who is accused in this case, who is on trial right now, they say that he actually hindered that 911 call.
The top House Democrat, New York's Hakeem Jeffries, weighs in today on the Trump cabinet selections.
Are these the best individuals available to the incoming Trump administration? Is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., by way of example, the best that America has to offer?
Many leading health officials have come out against Kennedy, who is a vaccine skeptic. CBS News political director Finn Gomez.
He feels he has a mandate to disrupt sort of the status quo Washington. Also, I think some of these picks are intended to be sort of a political flashbang grenade, if you will, to draw attention away from some of his other picks where he believes he has a better chance.
Distillers in Kentucky are raising concern about Trump's plan for tariffs on imports. In response to some tariffs in his first term, the European Union slapped a 25% tariff on American whiskey. Eric Gregory is president of the Kentucky Distillers Association and says a repeat would be hard to adjust to.
The blessing and curse of bourbon is you can't make it overnight. And so the bourbon that's being laid down today is not going to be available until 2030 or beyond.
At a DEA summit on fentanyl today, Attorney General Garland said agents this year have seized more than 47 million pills laced with the deadly additive.
DEA's lab testing found that 7 out of every 10 pills it seized contained enough fentanyl to kill someone.
Hundreds of unionized hotel workers have gone on strike at Virgin Hotels in Las Vegas. Striker Isabel Gonzalez says money is the big issue.
We can survive with the money that we are making right now because everyone is making more money than us at this time.
Well, Tropical Storm Sarah is moving through the Caribbean, but Jim Cantori at the Weather Channel says it may not prove to be an eventual threat to Florida.
2 days ago, we were looking at a potential major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Today, we are looking at very much a remnant low that may make it into the Gulf of Mexico.
Wall Street right now, the Dow is down 330. This is CBS News. New research has found a silver lining of sorts in COVID-19 that could become a breakthrough in cancer treatment.
Scientists at Northwestern Medicine found people with COVID had a reduction in certain cancers, with the virus creating special cells called monocytes that attack it. Ankit Barut.
So what we found was that the RNA of the COVID virus could convert these monocytes into not those cancer-friendly cells, but cancer-fighting cells.
Cancers that responded well to the therapy included lung, breast, and colon cancer. The next step, clinical trials on humans. Brad Gibson for CBS News.
In California, the Palm Springs City Council unanimously approved a nearly $6 million reparations settlement with former residents of a largely black neighborhood that was leveled in the 1960s for development. Also in the works, $21 million for housing and business support for those residents and their descendants. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
We've made it to Friday. Welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Joe Matthew is off today, but you know Joe calls this the fastest show in politics, and certainly politics have been moving fast this week as the Trump transition speeds along. A slew of nominees announced, but he's still leaving us waiting on his Treasury Secretary pick. We'll have the latest this hour with our wonderful team of Bloomberg reporters and our political panel, Jeannie Shanzano and Ashley Davis today. Plus, we still have a current president to talk about, and he is on the move in Peru, getting set to meet with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, on the sidelines of the APEC summit tomorrow. We'll have the latest on the U.S.-China relationship and what could come from those talks with China expert Anna Ashton of Ashton Analytics. But first, we also have to check on these markets because we got some economic data today and equities don't seem to like it much. Charlie Pellet, how we looking?
Right now we are looking lower across the board with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the red. We are on track also for a losing week. The S&P this week down by roughly 2%. Right to the numbers here. S&P now at 58.66 on this Friday, down 82 points, a decline of 1.4%. The Dow down 334, down 0.8%, while NASDAQ is down 444, drop there of 2.3%. Key takeaway, lows of the day this noon hour. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping 1.2%. The 10-year is at 4.45%. The 2-year 4.31%. Gold down $3.50 the ounce, 25.61 down 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil, we've got WTI now slumping by 1.7%. Bitcoin today advancing by 1.5%. Bottom line here, it is a down day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ as that post-election rally fizzles. So what about the outlook for the U.S. stock market? Phil Camporiali is portfolio manager at JP Morgan Investment Management.
So we're still bullish. We're still overweight by 10%. We were 10% overweight equity the day before the election. We're 10% overweight today. And the two words that I took from Chairman Powell's quote yesterday, you know, the whole world focused on hurry to cut rates. Mine was strength and economy, right? And that's the fundamental story, particularly with the U.S. consumer.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Meta Platform says it intends to appeal court rulings allowing dozens of states and hundreds of school districts across the U.S. to proceed with lawsuits blaming, quote, addictive social media apps for contributing to a mental health crisis among youths. Meta Platform shares today, they're down by 3.2%. Briefly, the Wall Street Journal says Donald Trump is considering tapping Fox Business Network host Larry Kudlow for a senior economic policy role in his administration, either leading Treasury or the National Economic Council. S&P down 1.4% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcast. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington for the Friday edition. Here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, tracking the markets for us. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons in Washington, tracking the movement in politics. And while much of that this week has focused on the incoming president, President-elect Donald Trump, and his transition, the forming of his second administration, there is still an administration in place right now and a sitting U.S. president. That would be Joe Biden. who is taking his presidential duties abroad over the course of the next several days. In fact, right now as we speak, he is in Lima, Peru for the APEC summit. And on the sidelines of that summit tomorrow, he will be meeting for the third time of his presidency face-to-face with Chinese President Xi Jinping. We want to get more on this meeting and the outlook for U.S. and China policy and turn now to Anna Ashton. She is founder of Ashton Analytics and, of course, knows a lot about China and this geopolitical relationship. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Anna, if we can just focus on tomorrow, should we expect any tangible outcome from that Biden-Xi meeting, or is, once again, this mostly about talking for the sake of doing so?
Hi, Kaylee. Thank you for having me on, and hopefully you can hear me clearly. My headphones suddenly stopped working. But I can hear you.
I can hear you great, Anna. Perfect.
Okay, fantastic. So no, I don't think that we should expect any big outcomes from this talk. The talk is significant as a sort of taking stock, as Jake Sullivan said, that this is an opportunity for the two leaders to assess how they've been doing with responsibly managing competition. And they're likely to talk about sort of the perennial issues in U.S.-China relations, including Taiwan, China's relationship with Russia, and human rights issues. But really, in terms of what the U.S. policy towards China is going to be moving forward, Biden is now the lame duck president, and all eyes are on incoming second-term President Trump.
Well, yeah, and he certainly has made his feelings about trade with China specifically well known. He's floated the idea of 60% tariffs plus on everything exported from China to the U.S. And I wonder, Anna, if you think that discussion around tariffs and those levels of tariffs specifically is actually just a negotiating tactic or something that is likely to come to fruition.
Well, we can all hope that it's a negotiating tactic because, of course, 60% tariffs on everything from China would be inflationary and, it would raise prices for American consumers and businesses, which is, I think, exactly the opposite of what most people were hoping would be accomplished with a second Trump presidency when they cast their vote for him. I think we should fully expect that there will be an increase in tariffs of some kind, whether it's 60% or something less than that, whether it's on all Chinese goods or on currently tariffed Chinese goods. And I think we should expect that because we know that Lighthizer has been involved in economic strategy for the incoming Trump administration. And we know that Trump has appointed, a series or has announced an intention to appoint a series of people to significant roles who are known for being China hawks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a jumping off point for negotiations. It could be. And we know that Trump has a history of cycling through cabinet members and senior officials. So this could be the starting lineup.
Well, and there's not just China hawks that will surround him in his second administration at the executive branch level of government, Anna, but plenty of China hawks in Congress, which is going to be controlled by Republicans in both chambers. In fact, the Republican chair of the China Select Committee in the House is putting forward new legislation to revoke the U.S. and China's normal trade status with the United States. What would the consequence of that be?
Significant and not dissimilar to 60% tariffs on everything coming in from China. I think that the writing has been on the wall for some time now that most policymakers in Washington feel that there needs to be a much tougher approach to China and there needs to be an expedited effort to make the U.S. less dependent on China in a whole variety of supply chains. And, Republicans, by and large, have been more aggressive and forward-leaning in their approach to that. So we should fully expect that that will be on the minds of members of Congress, as well as on the mind of Donald Trump and his advisors. And I think the key thing will be to, hopefully their ears will also be open to people who are pointing out the perhaps unintended consequences of the policies that they're considering and ways to mitigate them.
We spoke, Anna, with someone who did help to shape trade policy during the first Trump administration at the Commerce Department earlier this week. And her suggestion to us was that this is really about addressing China's overcapacity problem, like flooding the world with supply that it doesn't actually need, that there's no demand for, and that you have to do tariffs not just on China, but actually globally, inclusive of, say, allies in Europe, to actually help level that out and address those oversupply concerns. I wonder what you make of that logic, or if there is an alternative approach that could be utilized to have China stop producing so much and to pull back on some of this capacity expansion.
Well, I certainly question, Kaylee, the idea that applying tariffs to Europe is going to make a difference. U.S. applying tariffs to Europe would make a difference to China's overcapacity. I do think it's worth pointing out that Europe is actively exploring and pursuing tariffs on certain Chinese goods, such as electric vehicles, because of Chinese overcapacity and because of the fact that it looks like China is doubling down on its reliance on exports to help generate more robust economic growth at home right now. I think that that is going to continue to be a problem for the United States as well as other trading partners with China, unless China rolls out a very different approach to its economic recovery, one that more directly benefits consumers and causes consumers to spend money.
So, Anna, is effectively what you're saying actually the tariffs could have the opposite of the intended effect, which is that because of the hit to the economy of China by not being able to export all those goods necessarily to the U.S., China could actually stimulate more, spend more money on trying to build out its productive capacity, and therefore make the overcapacity problem even worse?
Well, I certainly think that if China feels that it can't successfully export to the United States, it's going to be trying to export elsewhere to our trading partners. And it will, I don't see a sign that China is considering rolling back its efforts to stimulate growth by increasing exports of certain kinds of products, such as electric vehicles or lithium-ion batteries. It is possible that tariffs from the United States will cause a rethink, or that China will consider policies that are U.S. specific to improve ties by not offloading oversupply into the United States, which of course will be harder to do anyway, given tariffs and given other laws and regulations that are in place that make it hard to send things like Chinese electric vehicles into the U.S. market.
Just quickly, Anna, we have about a minute left here. The U.S.-China relationship is one thing, but the U.S. also has concern about China's relationship with other adversaries like Russia. How should we be thinking about the nature of that relationship right now?
It's going to be a really interesting few months as this new administration gets settled in, because of course, the Trump has always had a different sense of Russia and Vladimir Putin than the Biden administration seems to have. He seems to be interested in more dialogue and in trying to come to an agreement that will end the conflict in Ukraine. Maybe not an agreement that Ukraine would like, but one that might settle things. And I think, he's going to be pursuing that, which will change the dynamic between the U.S. and China in terms of China's support for Russia. If the United States is wanting to come to the table with Russia to talk about ending the conflict in Ukraine in some way, China would like to have that conversation too. And if it is on terms where Russia is able to retain some of the territory that it has taken control of.
Anna Ashton of Ashton Analytics. We have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on Bloomberg.
12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all very much in the red. We are on track for a losing week for the U.S. stock market, right to the numbers, and here's where we stand. S&P now very close to the lows of the day, down 77 with the S&P at 58.71, a drop right now of just about 1.3%. The Dow down 315 now. That is a decline of 0.7%, while NASDAQ lower by 415 points, down 2.2%. The Russell 2000 index down now by 1.2%. 10-year at 4.44%, with a 2-year currently yielding 4.30%. Gold, little change now, just about flat on the day at $25.64 the ounce. It is down just 25 cents, while West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.7%, 67.53 a barrel. And Bitcoin now up by 1.8%, 1590 higher at 89,790 on Bitcoin. Sources tell Bloomberg General Motors will be cutting about 1,000 salaried workers globally in a move to streamline its operations. Those sources say most of the cuts will affect staff in North America. GM shares down now by 0.6%. Rival Ford down 0.4. Stellantis up by 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at the end of the trading week. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Joe Matthew is off today as we close out the week that it has been in politics, and certainly it is not over yet. We're bracing for more news from the president-elect Donald Trump as he slowly but surely fills out the roles for his second administration. We got a lot of news on that just yesterday. He says he'll be tapping North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum for Secretary of the Interior, former Congressman Doug Collins for Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and potentially most controversial of yesterday, at least, RFK Jr. for Secretary of Health and Human Services. That, of course, is on top of the eyebrow-raising selections of Matt Gaetz for Attorney General and former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. All of these raising questions about whether they could actually be confirmed in the U.S. Senate, which, of course, is now in Republican control, as is the House. So we want to get into all of this and turn to our expert team of Bloomberg editors. Laura Davison is with me. She is Bloomberg Politics editor with Megan Scully, who leads our Capital Influence team. Laura, just to start with you, and start with RFK Jr. specifically. This maybe isn't all that surprising, as we knew he was getting close to Trump toward the end of the campaign. It had been kind of suggested he was going to have some kind of role in this administration, but to actually be tapped for a secretary position that will require confirmation. What do you make of the pick?
This is going to be really interesting. I mean, even in the final days of the campaign, Trump said that he wanted RFK Jr. to, quote, go wild with healthcare policy. So this suggests that, he's looking for someone to shake things up, insert some of his very unorthodox views in there, things like that, taking fluoride, which helps support, teeth enamel out of the water system, taking, vaccine mandates, off the charts. This could be a very, controversial pick. Interestingly enough, RFK Jr.'s presidential website also says that he supports abortion rights. So this is also a way that could kind of, some Republicans who are concerned about some of his other healthcare views could say, oh, look, I don't want to support him because I don't align with him on abortion. We already had Mike Pence. Of course, he doesn't get a vote in the Senate, but he came out and said he doesn't support RFK Jr. He also doesn't support Trump for president, so I'm not sure how much his voice will have in this matter.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many in Trump camp still give weight to the words of the former Vice President Mike Pence. So on that point, Megan, is that providing some cover potentially for Senate Republicans who have, after leadership elections earlier this week, said we're in with Donald Trump, we want to pass his nominees quickly through the confirmation process? Are we going to hit some speed bumps here?
I do think we're going to hit some speed bumps. It's going to be a matter of where they want to expend their political capital, I think, and how many of these nominees are they going to want to either encourage the president-elect to withdraw, or that they just want to reject outright. Trump did, during his first term, run into some resistance from Republicans, most notably his first labor secretary pick, and that was ultimately withdrawn when Mitch McConnell told him there just weren't enough votes to confirm him. Republicans have 53 seats in the Senate, or we expect them to, with the Pennsylvania race going through a recount. So assuming that holds, then they need four Republican senators, to vote against Trump's nominees in addition to all of the Democrats. So we'll see what happens. Now, Bill Cassidy, a senator from Louisiana, who was one of the few senators who voted to convict Donald Trump after the January 6th, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol, we expect to be in charge of the Health Committee, which is going to oversee this confirmation process for RFK Jr. He put out a tepid statement last night saying he looks forward to talking to him about health policy. So we'll see what happens. But I do expect there's going to be some resistance.
Which means there's going to be an early test for the incoming Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, who spoke to Fox earlier this week about the confirmation process. Take a listen.
The president got a big mandate. The American people want change in this country. He wants to get a team in place that can do that, and we're going to work with him to see that he gets his team installed as quickly as possible so he can implement his agenda. All options are on the table, including recess appointments. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but we'll find out fairly quickly whether the Democrats want to play ball or not.
Just quickly, Megan, on recess appointments. This is something other presidents have used as well, but are we getting an indication that perhaps this would be used more frequently or avidly by this president-elect?
It certainly could, but Thune, even during the interview yesterday, sort of tempered and said it could be difficult to get into recess because you're going to need a simple majority to agree to that. So, and he mentioned specifically moderates like Senators Collins and Murkowski.
Well, yeah, it's a good point, especially as we consider that they do have some wiggle room because they have a greater than 51 majority, but it's still, every vote is going to count. As we consider, Laura, the strategy around all of this, obviously there has been much debate about whether these more controversial picks are actually just being put out there so that whatever pick he actually wants can slide in after the fact and seem like the hero. Is that actually the sense we are getting from the transition team, or is he just saying out loud, this is what I want, please make it happen?
It's more of the latter. You know, the Matt Gaetz pick, was something that was somewhat of a surprise. It was a decision made while Susie Wiles, his incoming chief of staff, who's been sort of a very moderating force on the campaign and sort of keeping the drama contained. She was not in the room when that was made. Generally, in any administration, there tends to be sort of one pick who is sort of the sacrificial lamb. Senators can sort of excise their frustrations on this one person. That person goes out. But there's a lot of people in the picks that we've just seen so far. Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Matt Gaetz, RFK Jr., and potentially more to come who could kind of drive up some of these concerns. We're expecting to get a lot of these economic policy picks, some more energy picks in the next coming days. So we could have more of these names that are, kind of causing angst on Capitol Hill.
I do want to get to more of those economic picks, but just quickly on Matt Gaetz, what's going to happen with this ethics committee report, Megan? Because he's no longer a member of the House of Representatives, but that doesn't mean there aren't bipartisan members of both the House and Senate that want to see what was in this thing.
I will say things don't tend to say, secret on the Hill for very long, particularly on the House side, and this was a bipartisan investigation. So I suspect that we're going to see some leaks around this report, or at the very least, they're going to send it over to the Senate for review ahead of Gaetz's confirmation hearings.
So we still might find out a little bit of what was revealed to the Ethics Committee. As we consider leaks, the transition team for Donald Trump has been a little leaky as well. We've had a pretty good idea of the way things are going, but it does seem this has really just fully spilled out publicly when it comes to the Treasury Secretary, a literal fight going on over the airwaves and in print. Scott Bessent, of course, we understand based on our reporting, down at Mar-a-Lago meeting with Trump, also penning an op-ed, also defending Trump's economic policy on Fox this week. Howard Lutnick has been hitting the airwaves too. How close is the president-elect to a decision on this one?
For the past several days, people in the room have been thinking he was getting close, and then the decision keeps getting punted. Part of this is Trump is getting frustrated by all of this public jostling for the job. He doesn't like this. He doesn't like the infighting. I'll note that's different than how things have been in previous Trump administrations and Trump campaigns. So he's even asking his 5 advisors, saying, hey, can you bring some additional names? He's looking at other people, including Larry Kudlow, who's the NEC director in his first term. Kudlow has some health issues. He's 77 years old. Unclear if he would want to take a job that is so big and so demanding. But there's a lot of, Trump is sort of playing this out to the very end, not revealing exactly where he's landing. But you see folks like Bessent who are really trying hard. Howard Lutnick is already down there in the room for a lot of these meetings on the transition team. He was notably at Trump's table last night for a gala that was down there. So both sides are really sort of giving it all they have in these final couple days.
Is it likely that whoever doesn't get the Treasury job is going to end up at CEA or NEC or something like that, still having a role in shaping economic economic policy, or if you don't get the job, you're not in the administration?
It definitely will depend on how people's egos play out in this. If you don't get the top job, another job I think we should look out for some of these folks who are, especially CEOs, big Wall Street names of UK ambassador sounds like a nice role. I'd like to also have that one as well potentially.
Okay, fair enough. Well, as we consider all the names here, Megan, we saw a headline cross the wire from Fox earlier today about Mike Rogers potentially being tapped to lead the FBI. And initially, I thought this was the current Congressman Mike Rogers of Alabama, and I thought he's polling from the House again. He already polled 3, and this is a tight majority. It's actually the former congressman who just lost the Senate race in Michigan against Alyssa Slotkin, who is the senator-elect. But are we going to see another poll from the House, or do you think he's heeding the words of the Speaker who's saying, look, this is a tight majority. Please keep in mind the math?
So what we're hearing essentially is that, Trump doesn't really care a whole lot about that, and we could see some more picks from the House. I think a lot of this remains in flux. Even if the president-elect is not, I believe his advisors and then certainly House Speaker Johnson are aware of how tenuous their majority is right now. And certainly there would be special elections to fill these slots. But if he takes too many more, there could come a point where the balance of power in the House tips, even if only, for a month or 2.
Well, yeah, so it becomes a question of the timing of those special elections. How long typically do they take to put together in the states we're talking about, which right now are just Florida and New York?
So in New York, it is 80 to 90 days. So that allows them to, from the moment they resign until, so you're talking 2 months there pretty much. Florida, I believe, is more or less the same. Gates has already resigned. So assuming he doesn't show up to be sworn in for the term that he was just reelected to, which we're not anticipating, but it is Matt Gaetz, they could start the process now. In fact, I presume that they are. The clock is ticking and they can get that special election underway.
A lot of focus in Florida. We just have less than a minute here, but you already mentioned that Howard Lutnick was with Donald Trump last night. So too was Elon Musk. And Laura, he said he can't get him out of Mar-a-Lago. Does that mean he's trying, or they're still feeling friendly at this point?
The big question is how long this Trump-Musk sort of bromance can continue. There have Susie Wiles apparently, likes him. Trump, has sort of been enamored with him. But just the longer this goes on, both of these men are quite volatile and have been known to, blow up relationships, particularly if they feel like someone is encroaching on their power and their decision making. So this is a key relationship to watch as we head into the new administration.
Yeah, what happens when Alpha meets Alpha? I guess we're all staying tuned to find out. Laura Davison and Megan Scully, Bloomberg's very best. Thank you so much for joining me. And of course, they're reminding us that we all need to be on our toes throughout the remainder of this day and potentially into the weekend as well, as we still have many selections that need to be made by the president-elect, not just for Treasury Secretary, but other high-profile roles as well, including Secretary of Commerce, of Energy. The list goes on, and we'll have more reaction to it from our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Ashley Davis will be with me straight ahead right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Red on the screen. It is a down Friday. We're on track for a losing week for the U.S. stock market. And right now, just about the lows of the day. Right to the numbers. S&P down 82, decline of 1.4%. Stocks are falling as Trump trades lose steam. Investors also betting that the Fed will have to slow the pace of policy easing. The Dow now down 382, down 0.9%. NASDAQ down 429, particularly hard hit, now down by 2.2%. Again, to put it all in context, S&P down by 1.4%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares lower now by 1.3%. 10-year 4.43%. The 2-year 4.29%. Gold little change, down $1.50 the ounce to $25.63. West Texas Intermediate crude slumping 2.1%, $67.25 a barrel. And Bitcoin now advancing 1.8%, 89,829 on Bitcoin. October was a trying month for America's factories. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Boeing machinist strike and a pair of hurricanes reverberated through U.S. manufacturing for a second month, cutting industrial production. The now settled 53-day walkout at
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We go. You make Monzo Monzo.
Hi, I'm Laurie Haynes, CEO and co-founder of Shirar, and I'm really excited to tell you that we are going to be raising funds for Shirar again. After a successful raise in 2023, it's time to scale.
We hope that you enjoy the pitch deck and the financial model. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us, and we can't wait for you to be part of Shirar.
Musk, very well known, high kind of celebrity threshold, lots of money and clearly influence when it comes to those in the orbit of the president-elect. But the president-elect notoriously doesn't love to share attention. And I wonder if you see the potential for this relationship to sour at some point.
Yeah, Kayla, you made me laugh because that's exactly what I was thinking when I heard that. I thought, did he try to get him out? And Elon's not leaving. Somebody described this on both sides, from Donald Trump's perspective and, of course, Elon Musk's, as they both got a brand new toy in each other, and they're having an awful lot of fun playing together. But you do wonder how long this bromance can last. And, I also think about as Elon Musk is partnered together with Vivek Ramaswamy and working on this Government Efficiency Committee, how he is going to enjoy Washington. Because as you know, Kaylee, this is a guy who's really been effective in every aspect of his professional life, and that's obviously an understatement. He's going to face a very different experience, if you will, in Washington, D.C. Those cuts he was able to make after he spends $44 billion at Twitter or X won't be as easy to make in Washington, D.C., given how the government is structured. So I do wonder how he is going to enjoy this time he is playing around in Washington.
Well, it's an excellent point, Jeannie. He obviously can exercise a lot of control as an actual executive running companies like Tesla and SpaceX, but that's not necessarily the role he's been given by Donald Trump with this kind of outside of government department of government efficiency with Vivek. So, Ashley, to bring you in here, voice and actual influence, the ability to influence policymaking ultimately can be different things. The power of the purse is lying with Congress. So how much will the recommendations of, frankly, both Musk and Vivek ultimately matter?
Well, I think that's a very good point, and everything that was said is 100% true. And one of the things I keep saying these last couple of days since the, quote, department was created, the last department that was created was Department of Homeland Security. Obviously, it took years, and it had a budget, had to be an act of Congress to pass. This is really not a department. I think they called it that more. It's more of a commission, as was just said. But he doesn't have a budget, at least the congressional budget, so it's going to have to find money from other places. But the short time frame of less than 2 years to get this done may be helpful, but as you know, Washington isn't as fun as you think it is. And so he's going to have to deal with unions, he's going to have to deal with all sorts of things trying to have this government efficiency really work. And the relationship with Vivek is going to be very interesting.
I know. There's been much made about the two chairs of something that's supposed to be efficient, and we won't get into that.
Type A personalities.
Yeah, exactly. Jeannie, one more on Elon Musk before we move on. There's also been reporting this week about Elon Musk reportedly having a meeting with Iran's ambassador to the UN, discussing how to diffuse tensions essentially between Iran and the US. We've obviously seen other reporting as well of Elon Musk joining phone calls with the president-elect and world leaders for whatever he tries to do with domestic policy and the actual spending structure of the US government. Is what's actually more concerning the role he could play geopolitically?
Absolutely. I'm concerned about both, in fact, and I think the geopolitical element of this is deeply concerning. The United States has a president now, and we will have a new president in a few months. And the administration should be speaking with as much of one voice as it can. And so to have these sort of conversations with somebody who has a role but has not been confirmed by the Senate, it is a bit concerning and confusing. And of course, on the domestic front, we are going to see a test of what is so concerning in a representative democracy. What happens when the wealthiest person who has ever walked the earth in history, as far as we know, decides he wants to own politics? We heard a little bit of this last week when he was rumored to tell Republicans that if they step out of line with the administration going forward, he would have them primaried in their next go-around. So this is concerning on both levels, and I think it's something that Donald Trump is, I almost call him Donald Musk, can you imagine? Donald Trump is going to have to be very concerned about.
Freudian slip from Jeannie, I think, to Jeannie's point, though, on the primary threat and how Republicans are trying to align themselves very much with this administration. Certainly the new Republican leadership in the Senate is doing so. They're going to face a test here with those that they do have confirmation power over when it comes to Matt Gaetz, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. What do you think John Thune is thinking right now, Ashley?
Well, the one thing I did want to add to that as well is just the security clearance issue when he is dealing with geopolitical issues. I mean, that's going to be a concern. I'm assuming he has some sort of clearance in regards to Starlink. And so, but still, I mean, the difference of true diplomacy is going to be something that, as was said, it needs to be taken very seriously.
Excellent point.
In regards to the confirmations, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks Donald Trump's loving the chaos of Matt Gaetz right now, right? He knows exactly what he was doing in regards to throwing this name out. It obviously sent shock waves around the world, but really the country and in the political system. And what was said on your earlier statement is exactly true. There's three major things that needs to happen. A significant FBI background check. He's obviously been investigated by the FBI already. He has to get through committee. and he has to, and Chuck Grassley, who's going to take the reins at the Judiciary Committee, which no one's recognizing right now because he can go back. He's not ranking now, obviously someone else is, but he said he takes this very seriously, very seriously. And you also have two senators such as Murkowski, you have Collins, you have Collins up for re-election that she's now running. It's going to be a game, and it's going to be something. And then obviously the third thing I was going to say is that you have to be confirmed by the Senate. Obviously, especially RFK and Matt Gaetz are not going to get any Democrats, you would think. So in my prediction, it's going to be very telling to see what happens. And I think the Senate's going to take its job seriously. I do think that RFK would get a little bit easier confirmation than Gaetz, because RFK, remember, was already vetted under Obama when he was going to be EPA secretary. So that will be a little bit more interesting, I think. Gaetz, I don't see how it happens.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you on that. On the RFK point, though, Mike Pence, of course, who was the vice president during the first Trump administration, came out against this pick because specifically of his support of more liberal abortion access. And I wonder if that's something that actually could give a lot of Republicans in the Senate cover not to vote to confirm him.
Yes, and I also think the biggest dynamic is going to be Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is obviously done, but he's going to still have his finger. He's very powerful. He's not running again. He can take a fall by voting against a lot of these candidates that are put forward, because he doesn't care. He's already picked a fight. Yes, and so he's already picked a fight with Trump, over the last couple of years. And so what's his vote matter? So does he, along with Murkowski and Collins, and I think Collins, she takes her job very seriously as well. However, in Maine, when she's up for re-election, how does she strike that balance of voting completely against all Trump's nominations or not?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. And of course, the votes could be informed by what material ultimately, Jeannie, all of the senators are able to get from the House Ethics Committee. Matt Gaetz, of course, has already resigned from Congress. Therefore, a formal issuance is very much in question. We heard that the Speaker, Mike Johnson, has asked the Ethics Committee, according to reporting from Axios, not to release the report because he says it would set a terrible precedent. But what precedent would be set if they don't share this information with the Senate as they're trying to confirm him?
Yeah, I mean, they are in a no-good situation, a no-win situation, I should say. I believe that it is important to keep that information confidential. And yet, on the other hand, I would hope there was a way it could be shared confidentially with the senators who have to make this decision. But of course, I think all three of us would probably agree that it's highly unlikely that if it is shared, it is going to be made public. And I do worry about the impact of charges that are unsubstantiated. That said, this man is asking to be the highest ranking law enforcement official in the country. And if what we're hearing is true, these allegations are vile and abhorrent, and he absolutely has no business being in that role. So it's not an easy decision to make. I would just say on the RFK front, as dangerous as I believe Matt Gaetz would be, we are talking about somebody who has long peddled anti-vax statements, who has, challenged the COVID vaccination, which I think Donald Trump should be celebrating what he did with Operation Warp Speed. So that is also a deeply concerning appointment on the part of Donald Trump.
Is a recess appointment a potential way to get around these issues, Ashley, or you think that isn't a real threat?
No, I mean, I remember recess appointments during Bush, and obviously Obama did 120 some, Bush did 170 some. I mean, those are usually used for certain controversial judges or lower level assistant secretaries, undersecretaries, maybe ambassadorships. I think because, and I'm not going to go into all the details of what you have to do in regards in the House and Senate to be able to do these recess appointments, I think it's a little bit harder than the rhetoric that's kind of being talked about from the president and his team. I think it's something that will, especially on Gaetz, I don't think the Republicans would vote to go out of session to have Gaetz do it during a recess appointment, especially. So I'm not as concerned about that, but I also wanted to say, in regards to what Jean said, is that if the FBI does their job, they should be able to pick up what the Ethics Committee has.
So it'll show up in a background check regardless.
Correct. I mean, or they're interviewing the right people. The FBI can interview whoever they want to in regards to your background check. So the first person I would interview is the chair of the ethics committee, right?
Excellent point. Paging Michael Guest, I guess. Ashley Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, my political panel today. Thank you so much. They will, of course, be back for more in the next hour, as I stay glued here to my screen to see if anything crosses the headline on more nominees dropping. We're still waiting, I would remind everyone, for the Treasury Secretary pick, and Bloomberg has confirmed that one of the candidates, Scott Bessent, is spending time with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago today. So we'll have the latest on that coming up in the second hour of Balance of Power. Much more is still ahead on this Friday edition. TGIF, everyone. We'll be back for more here on Bloomberg Radio.
They're the people who deal the cards, whether it's fire or electricity, or for good or bad, or the cotton gin, or the iPhone, or the atom bomb. Those are the cards, and the rest of us just play it. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think technology is the thing that causes these big step changes in civilization. So obviously you've got things like, say, the Gutenberg press, before which it was very difficult to get books. They were very rare. Even if you had a thirst for knowledge, you really couldn't do anything about it because there were very few books to read. So, and the internet is something beyond the Gutenberg press, I think. But you know, when I first saw the internet coming into being in a way that the general public could use it, it felt like the humanity as a whole was developing a nervous system. So previously, the way that information would travel would be by osmosis, one person to another, or one person calling another. But the access to information was very limited. Now with the internet, it's like having a nervous system. It's like any part of humanity has access to almost all the information of humanity. Like you could be in the middle of the Amazon jungle with, say, a Starlink terminal and have access to more information than the president did in 1980.
Politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're wrapping up a busy week in American politics domestically as we learn more and more about the composition of Donald Trump's incoming cabinet. But he's still keeping us waiting on a number of critical nominations, including Treasury Secretary. And we'll have the latest from Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsin on that in reaction from our political panel today, Jeannie Shanzano and Ashley Davis. But we have to keep an eye on geopolitics as well, specifically on what's going down in Peru tomorrow, where President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are set to meet on the sidelines of the APEC summit. I'll speak with a member of the House Select Committee on Competition with China, Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, the Republican from Iowa, and be joined by her colleague from across the aisle, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California. First, though, we have to look at financial markets as we close out the trading week, and it's not looking so good out there for stocks, Charlie Pellet.
Indeed, we are looking at a down day here, on track for a losing week on the S&P 500 index, but right to today's numbers, a lot of red on the screen. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all declining as those Trump trades lose steam. S&P right now down 80 points to 58.68, a decline now of just about 1.4%. We've got the Dow down 339, a decline of 0.8%, while NASDAQ is down now by 436 points, a decline of 2.3%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, which has been ripping higher in recent weeks, down today by 1.4%. 10-year at 4.43%, with a 2-year that's currently yielding 4.29%. Gold lower, little change today, down $2.50 the ounce to $25.62. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2.3%, 67.09 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin up 1.4% right now, 89,478 on Bitcoin. Sources tell Bloomberg General Motors will be cutting about 1,000 salaried workers globally in a move to streamline its operations. Those sources say most of the layoffs will affect staff in North America. GM shares today trading lower by 0.7%. New Jersey's gubernatorial race getting another entrant. Representative Josh Gottheimer has announced his run for governor of the state, joining a packed field of candidates who are jockeying to succeed term-limited Governor Phil Murphy next year. Recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 81, on track for a losing week. S&P right now down by 1.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here she is with the Friday edition, Kaylee Lines.
Happy Friday, Charlie Pellet. It is the Friday edition indeed. We've learned a lot this week here in Washington. It's been a big one in terms of the presidential transition, learning more and more about who will be close to Donald Trump in his second administration. It includes, of course, czar-type roles, people who will work with him in the White House that don't necessarily have to be confirmed by the Senate, but plenty of cabinet department leader level positions that will have to be. You could list them off. Secretary of State, nominated Marco Rubio. Kristi Noem tapped to run Homeland Security, Pete Hegseth for the Department of Defense, Doug Burgum for Interior, Doug Collins for Veteran Affairs, RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services. We've learned a lot, but we still have more to learn, specifically on the role that we're most interested in here on Bloomberg TV and radio, and that would be that of Treasury Secretary. Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsin has some new reporting on that effort, and she is joining me now here in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Saleha, you've reported that one of the candidates that we understood through your work has been advocated for by Trump allies, Scott Bessent, is down in Florida meeting with Donald Trump. Is that some kind of sign?
You know, right now, I have no idea who might get that job. It could be Lutnick, Howard Lutnick, who is also, well admired by Trump. Trump made him a co-chair of his transition team. It could be Scott Bessent. Many people have been making phone calls to people around Trump, maybe to the president-elect himself, in support of Scott Bessent. A lot of those people, as we've already reported, are people that align with Trump's ideals, like Steve Bannon, like Ralph Reed. But at the same time, all this infighting could mean that Trump thinks, well, you two keep fighting, I've got somebody sitting over here.
Well, yeah, which enter maybe a rogue candidate like the Wall Street Journal reporting Larry Kudlow could be up for consideration. He, of course, was involved in the NEC during the first Trump administration. Does being co-chair of the transition, though, for Howard Lutnick, which you mentioned, give him some kind of advantage? He's helping orchestrate this effort.
I know. It's something that we saw ages ago with Dick Cheney, who was put in charge of helping his friend's son, George W. Bush, helping him find a running mate. He put together a committee. He auditioned and interviewed people. And in the end, Dick Cheney got the job.
Okay, well, so maybe we look back at history as an example here. When we consider who we know at least is off the list, some who we had thought might end up having some kind of chance at Treasury Secretary, like Jay Clayton, has now been tapped to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, Trump ruled out yesterday. Bloomberg actually had a chance to ask Jamie Dimon about that in the aftermath. Here's what he told our Lisa Abramowitz.
I just want to tell the president also, I haven't had a boss for 25 years. I'm not about ready to start. The most important thing is whoever had been elected, and this is my belief, they are entering and going to be responsible for the most complicated geopolitical, military, and geoeconomic situation that the world has faced since World War II. And of course, I wish them all the best.
So Jamie Dimon is one Wall Street voice who we know is taken out of this equation, but based off of the names that we're understanding are in contention, it does seem like he does want to tap Wall Street specifically for this.
So far, that is what the most clear thing that I can tell you. I can't say even make a guess who's going to get it, but it does seem like Trump wants to pick someone with Wall Street pedigree, which is what he did in his first term. He had Stephen Mnuchin, who came from Goldman Sachs, a Hollywood financier, an interesting background there, and had known Trump for many, many years. And he was someone that he had a long-term relationship with and saw him as someone who would implement his policies. He did end up serving as a little bit of a bulwark to some of the ideas that maybe markets would really have gotten into a tantrum over. But in the end, that was good for Trump because he had stability in his economic policy team.
Well, and that is a team, to your exact point. It's not just about the Treasury Secretary. We've kind of seen him releasing these announcements in groups. Should we expect at the same time we're getting Treasury Secretary, we might learn more about the National Economic Council or the Council of Economic Advisors as well?
Yeah, our reporting does show that that pattern might hold. We saw a lot of national security and foreign policy picks come through. We saw law enforcement picks come through, and now it looks like that today is the day that Trump is really going to start focusing on economic policy jobs. That's U.S. Trade Representative, Commerce, NEC, and then, of course, Treasury Secretary.
All right, Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsen. I'm going to let her get back to her desk. She's been hard at work tracking all this down for us. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And, of course, as we consider those that Donald Trump has not tapped yet, we do know some that he has. A few of them that he selected have actually been pulled from the House of Representatives. That includes now former Congressman Matt Gaetz for AG, Florida Congressman, another one, Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor, and then, of course, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who has been tapped to be the UN ambassador for the U.S. So that reduces what looks like it could be a very tight majority. And we want to turn now to a member of that majority, both the current one and the one incoming. Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa is joining me now here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Congresswoman, welcome back to Balance of Power. Can the conference afford to lose one more member to this administration, or would you encourage the president-elect to stop here?
Well, I think it's very, very clear we have a narrow House majority, and we need to be able to deliver and to govern on President Trump's agenda starting on day one. So that's going to be my priority. I'm very, very proud of our, of course, next UN ambassador, Elise Stefanik. She's been a good friend of mine and a great mentor to me here in Congress as well. And I look forward to seeing the Senate do its job to confirm all of President Trump's nominees so that we can execute on that agenda. But look, we have a very narrow House majority. We have one right now. I would like to see us work together, and hopefully, I think what you're seeing here on the Hill right now is definitely a more unified government approach. And certainly in our House Republican Conference, we are feeling that momentum heading into the next Congress.
Well, as the Senate does have to confirm these nominees, should they be armed with all potentially available information when they do so, specifically when it pertains to your now former colleague, Matt Gaetz? Does that ethics report need to come out?
Well, I think, look who's going to be chairing the Senate Judiciary Committee. Every single one of these nominees is going to get a thorough vetting from my colleague from Iowa in Senator Chuck Grassley. I know he has a lot of experience in going through this process, so I would just encourage all of the senators to do their job and vet every nominee. But I think we do need to get these nominees through. President Trump did win this election. We need to make sure that his picks do get that vetting, but that we can get them into place as soon as possible.
Well, all of that, of course, is going to come in the next Congress, and there is still business to finish in this one, including sorting out funding by the deadline in December. Congresswoman, we were speaking with your colleague Andy Barr of Kentucky yesterday, who suggested to us he does not want to see the can kicked down the road with another continuing resolution, that there needs to be a clean slate in January, and that means actually getting the appropriations bills passed. I just wonder if that means we're either going to end up with that CR that he doesn't want or some kind of omnibus to end the year.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't want to see an omnibus. As a House appropriator, I've worked tirelessly to get all 12 of these individual appropriations bills across the finish line. I'm very frustrated that we haven't been able to do that. But I do want to, again, make sure that on day one, come the next 119th Congress, that we're giving President Trump the best success plan. I do think that also means clearing the stack, but I'm going to wait to hear from the president. And I know our appropriations chair, Tom Cole, is planning to do the same. We want to see what he wants to do in terms of government funding. And all of that is going to have to, kind of come colliding in with the end-of-year priorities for the Farm Bill. We're already talking about what the tax bill for next year is going to look like. So we just want to make sure that we're doing this right. What I don't want to see is a continuation of a lot of really, really bad Democrat policies that we've had to negotiate on over the past couple of years. I think with the current balance of power and knowing what's coming in the next Congress, I think some of my colleagues across the aisle may be a little bit more willing to negotiate heading into the end of the year.
Well, I did want to ask you about that Farm Bill, Congresswoman, considering you are representing constituents in Iowa that could be affected ultimately by this. What is the prospect of that actually happening in this lame duck session?
Yeah, well, I've continued to advocate to our leadership about this. Our producers and our manufacturers need this long-term stability. We have some great investments in there for precision agriculture, for trade, which I know is going to be a huge priority for the next administration. Hasn't been much of one under the current administration. So there are a lot of provisions in there that I am excited to see move forward that I think are not only about preserving our food security, which I think is national security, but also, again, making sure that we can be competitive on the global stage. So I will continue to advocate to our leadership to hopefully get that done in the next couple of weeks. Again, I would defer to the chairman on that, G.T. Thompson, who's been working in a bipartisan way. I know that passed out of the House with bipartisan votes out of the House Agriculture Committee. And our Senate counterparts haven't done any bill yet. So that's a little disheartening. But again, I'm hopeful that they'll take up our House bill, and I'll continue to put pressure on our leadership to do that.
Well, Congresswoman, I'd like to pick up on your trade point, because earlier this week here on Balance of Power, we spoke with the CEO of Landis, which is an agricultural services company, Matt Karstens, and this is what he had to say about the way in which trade relationships as it influences agriculture should be approached. Take a listen, and I'll have you respond.
We've got to make sure that both sides are being understood, whatever the solve is and whatever the cause and effect is to agriculture, because those international markets are absolutely critical for companies like Landis and Conduit that are trying to move those goods out of our state, out of the Midwest, and get them into a position to go into a global market. And when you lose volume like we have to China, that has a long-term ripple effect, and it's hard to recover from.
So, Congresswoman, as the president-elect has talked about ratcheting up tariffs on China, what should farmers in the agricultural community be bracing for in terms of potential retaliation?
Yeah, well, for every action that we take, we know China is going to take some sort of action and to retaliate. I think the most important thing here is that President Trump is the first president in a long time to actually stand up to the Chinese Communist Party and to stand up to President Xi. If there's one thing that I know, it's that China's been taking advantage of the United States for decades. They haven't been following normal trade rules. And while they are a very critical market for our producers, not just from Iowa, but from this country, we need to make sure that we are playing fair going forward. It was in my district just about 10 years ago that the Chinese were discovered trying to literally steal seeds to take them back to China to reverse engineer them and cheat. So they're cheating, they're trying to steal our intellectual property, whether that's in the manufacturing space or in the agriculture space. So I look forward to seeing a tough stance on China. This current administration has not taken a tough stance, has really acquiesced there. And now we see that debt trap diplomacy continuing to happen all over the world with President Xi, going around and handing out cash to all of these nations. We need to be making sure we're making entrees to people who, not just for trade relationships, but for defense purposes as well. And I will look forward to seeing, our new defense secretary and the president work to achieve those goals so we can actually be competitive on the global stage again.
Well, we have seen this administration leave intact the tariffs in large part that were put into place in the Trump administration and expand export controls as well. But you, of course, sit on the China Select Committee, which makes you a very valuable voice on this. And I wonder if you support that committee's chairman, Chairman Molinar's legislation that he put forward this week to revoke China's normal trade status. Are the votes there for that?
We're definitely taking a look at all bills, but I think what I support about the chairman is that he is taking a tough stance on China. They have not been following the rules. I'm not sure if that bill is the ultimate answer here. We definitely want to be cognizant of the impact to agricultural states like Iowa, and that is one thing that I heard loud and clear from my producers is, you know, we still need to be able to sell our products to China. So I want to be cognizant of that in any stance that we take. It is a pretty bold stance, and what I will say is that I think we do need to be signaling, though, that we're ready to get tough on them, right? If you don't play by the rules and you don't start playing on a level playing field and you continue with these malign practices, then there are going to be some consequences there, and I support the chairman in his efforts to do that.
Well, President Biden is going to be sitting down with Chinese President Xi Jinping in person tomorrow on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. It's their third such meeting of his presidency, and obviously, as his presidency is almost over, it will be the last. And I wonder if you still see room here for some kind of forward movement to be made when it comes to this relationship and the normalization of communication here before President Trump takes office in January.
Well, I think communication is always a key goal, no matter who it is that we're trying to work with. As I said, we need to make sure we still preserve those markets for trade going forward. I'm hopeful President Biden will continue to hopefully express that we need to have American dominance. America needs to be strong on the global stage. And again, this is about fairness and a level playing field. And so I think what we will see is President Xi probably take a little bit of a different posture, knowing who's coming in next. He's seen this show before. He knows that President Trump talks tough, carries that. He's not, speak softly and carry a big stick. No, it's speak loudly and carry a big stick too. So I think that he certainly understands what's coming down the pipeline. But again, my goal for diplomatic relations is always going to be able to have open lines of communication.
How important, as we don't have the announcement yet as to who Donald Trump would like this to be, Congresswoman, will the U.S. trade representative be in this next administration? And is there anyone you hope gets the job?
Well, certainly, Ambassador Lighthizer did I think, fantastic job. We've had him actually as a witness before our China Select Committee several times to talk about the importance of trade. I would certainly hope someone like him is being considered for that. It took far too long for the Biden administration to get a trade representative in place. I think we have suffered economically. We see major gaps in our trade export numbers, and we are actually experiencing a deficit in that in some key sectors for the first time. We need to reverse that, and I think that someone like Ambassador Lighthizer would be great if he decides to come back. But I look forward to seeing who the president picks to fill out the rest of his cabinet, because I do think Agriculture Secretary and obviously Trade Rep are going to be critical for a state like Iowa.
Well, you and me both, Congresswoman. I'm keeping a close eye on the wire to see when more names come down. But we sincerely appreciate you joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. That is the Republican Congresswoman from Iowa, Ashley Hinson, live from Capitol Hill on this Friday. And as we wait for those further cabinet selections and others joining the second Trump administration to be announced, we'll turn back shortly to our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Ashley Davis are with me today as we assess not just the names themselves, but the strategy behind them, the kind of flooding of the zone we have seen with these selections over the course of this week. It certainly has not been a chill one in Washington, shall we say. And we'll have that covered for you next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining, just about the worst level of the day, on track for a losing week for the U.S. stock market. Here's where we stand right to the numbers. S&P currently down 80 to 58.68. That is a drop of just about 1.4%. Dow Industrials now slumping by 299 points, down 0.7%, and NASDAQ, the composite index, down 450, a drop there of just about 2.4%. 10-year, 4.42%, with the 2-year, 4.28%. Gold, little change, down $1 the ounce now, 25.63, down less than 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude right around 67 a barrel now, down by 2.4%. Bitcoin up 1.7%, 89,750 right now on Bitcoin. Applied Materials after earnings down 8.7%. It is the largest American maker of chip manufacturing equipment. It gave a disappointing revenue forecast, signaling that some semiconductor customers may be holding off on orders. Speaking of semiconductors, next week NVIDIA will be the most closely watched earnings story when it reports Wednesday after the close of trading. Today we got NVIDIA down now by just about 3.8%. Representative Josh Gottheimer has announced his run for governor of New Jersey, joining a packed field of candidates jockeying to succeed term-limited Governor Phil Murphy next year. The 49-year-old Democrat and one-time executive at Microsoft just won re-election and has fashioned himself as a moderate in his swing North Jersey district. Again, recapping, S&P right now down 81, down 1.4% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. She's got us covered. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. By she's got us covered, Charlie means I'm literally glued to my Bloomberg terminal, and specifically the NI heads function. If you have one, you know what I'm talking about, because we're tracking everything that's coming out of this Trump transition team. Donald Trump just confirming that Stephen Chung, who of course was working with his campaign, will be joining the administration as director of communications. But sources now telling Bloomberg someone doesn't want to join this second administration. Larry Kudlow. Remember, there was reporting earlier today that Larry Kudlow could be up for either National Economic Council or even Treasury Secretary. He's currently a host on Fox Business, but sources telling us that he has told the Trump team that he does not want a job in this second term. So who's going to get it? We still don't know about Treasury Secretary or other important economic roles that could help shape economic policy under a second go-around with Donald Trump. So let's turn to our political panel for more. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is with me, Democratic analyst, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Ashley Davis, Republican strategist and principal at Westfront Strategies. Ashley, just to begin with you, we've kind of seen this happening where people are taking themselves out of contention. John Paulson did it. It was too financially complicated for him. Now I guess Larry Kudlow maybe would rather stay in the anchor chair, and it's all kind of playing out publicly in the press. What do you make of it?
I mean, that's not real surprising with the Trump, you know, we're back to the waking up every day to tweets, or now it's X.
True Social posts, X.
True Social. So, I mean, I think it's not surprising. And what was really interesting was your earlier segment on Jamie Dimon, because I think him being a little coy during the election of really not supporting either candidate was probably why Trump right away came out and said, you know, Jamie Dimon's not going to be, I mean, talking about one of the best Treasury secretaries he could pick, it would be him. I also agree that I think that the names that are being floated right now for Treasury Secretary are probably not who it's going to be. I mean, at least the final contenders, because I think that he would have made, it's obviously one of the most important positions, and I think that he, there's some reason he's not picking one of them. But I do think Linda McMahon gets commerce, because I think she's just slow and steady. She's keeping under the radar screen. She's being very, you know, professional. And so I would expect that to happen. I hope so. She's a good...
Yeah, of course, former small business administrator during the first administration. Jeannie, I wonder what you make of that. The fact that people are trying actively in public to secure this job, could that make them actually less likely to get it?
It absolutely could. You know, the reality is it's hard to get in Donald Trump's brain. I mean, you know, just reading what Mark Caputo was reporting about how Matt Gaetz rose to the top of that list. Apparently, early this week, he wasn't even on the list for AG. They end up flying to Washington together. And Donald Trump, frustrated by the other contenders talking about legal theories and the Constitution, looks at Matt Gaetz, and Matt Gaetz says he's going to go over there and start cutting heads. And he gets the nod. So, you know, this is back to what you guys were just talking about, the Donald Trump who likes to do this as a reality TV game. And so this is where we are. So I would never pretend to know what he's going to do next with Treasury or otherwise.
Well, it is interesting, though, Ashley, when we consider what we were hearing from him on the campaign trail, the messaging that ultimately got him elected to a second go at the presidency. Part of it was the border, and we got a lot of those kind of appointments first, not just Kristi Noem for DHS, but Stephen Miller, for example, being tapped, Tom Homan being tapped as well. I would have thought, based off of what he was saying, that he was going to take on the economy next, right? It was fixing the economy that he was running on.
Absolutely, but we have to remember it's only a week.
I know. It feels like it's been a year.
Exactly. That's why I do think that he hasn't, that there's probably someone else out there. I mean, obviously you still have Glenn Youngkin, who would be fantastic as a Treasury Secretary. You know, does Haggerty come back maybe? You know, he's always someone that's been talked about. But I do agree as well that there's probably someone from Wall Street that's going to get it. I would expect that we find someone over the weekend or by Monday, or he announces someone.
Well, certainly we're all hoping for that here on Bloomberg. This one's really important to us because it's a reminder as well that Donald Trump, as I was saying, made a lot of promises on the campaign trail, a lot of things he would like to do from an economic perspective, but he only has so much unilateral power as the president, especially in kind of enforcing these kind of things. So just characterize, Ashley, how important these roles actually are in ensuring that Donald Trump's agenda actually becomes reality.
Treasury and USTR ambassador is very important, especially in regards to tariffs for both fronts. Obviously, the Secretary of Commerce is also very important. But a lot of the policies, obviously, with tax reform coming up, Treasury is going to, the Hill's going to look to Treasury a lot to see what the Trump administration wants. But at the end of the day, they have to pass the bill. And I do think some of what Congresswoman Henson was saying in regards to the small numbers in the House. I do think some of those members that are kind of the far right that have caused problems for the last few years for the Speaker and obviously McCarthy before that, they're going to get in line better if it's Trump's policies because they're Trump people.
Okay.
So I actually think that the moderate Republicans, Brian Fitzpatrick and others, are going to be the ones that have more of the power this time than the extreme right.
Well, and they're the ones, right, Jeannie, that need to get reelected in 2026 so that Donald Trump doesn't, say, get impeached again if we have a Democratic House, because he has 4 years. This Congress only has 2. So it makes those kind of frontline Republican members, if you will, really important.
Oh, they are absolutely important. You know, and I think we forget that he's coming with a much narrower margin in the House than he did the first time. But to Ashley's point, you have a lot more people who line up with his, you know, make America first values. And so he may be able to make up for that. But I'm not one of the people who thinks that, and I've been debating with so many of my friends on this, that this is a Washington on the Republican side that is without schisms. I think there are schisms in Washington on the Republican side, and we are going to see those play out. I mean, you just look at who he has nominated so far, and you can see people with vastly different governing philosophies from, you know, say a Marco Rubio all the way to a Matt Gaetz. Now, you know, who knows who's going to get in, but, you know, America First, the Donald Trump Republican Party is a big party now, and they've got people from all different elements, and the trick is going to be able to make them work together. And I think it's going to be easier said than done when it comes to passing some of these economic bills that he has talked about on the campaign trail.
Well, as we consider potential schisms within the party leadership is a question here. I actually spoke with a member of the newly elected and current Senate leadership, Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, last night, specifically on this notion of recess appointments that could be made by Donald Trump. This is what she told me.
we can fulfill in the regular order way of confirming the nominees, and that's what we intend to do. I think all of this talk about recess appointments is way premature. I don't believe that's the direction that we want to go, and I don't think President Trump will want to go that. He wants the confirmation of the Senate because we're going to be working together all throughout these next several years, and we need to make sure that we not that we respect each other's roles, but that we have the confirmation from each other that we're moving in the right direction.
So she doesn't think Donald Trump is going to want to abandon the checks and balances here, Ashley, but she can't know for sure what Donald Trump wants any more than the rest of us can. And I wonder if you do think this brand new leadership team that's going to take hold in January could potentially run into conflict with Donald Trump pretty early on.
Well, I think the statement that John Thune made is right after he got elected was the fact that he's going to keep the filibuster in place. And to me, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, I think that's a very important. If we don't have that filibuster in place, no matter if you're Republican or Democrat, there's going to be really bad policies that are passed beyond what already gets passed sometimes. So I was really happy that he came out. That I think that Trump will go after him publicly, just like he did McConnell when McConnell said he's keeping the filibuster in place. So I think that's going to be the number one rule. I agree with Senator Capito. I really, as I said earlier in the segment, I think this recess appointment is a little bit of a noise right now.
Well, I guess we'll all find out come January whether or not it's noise or real. It's sometimes hard to tell.
I also think we're going to be in
Washington.
session until like Easter because they're going to want to get stuff done. They're going to pass the budget resolution. They're going to do tax reform right away. I think it's going to be crazy.
So much to look forward to. Just when we think we might get a break at some point, Ashley's like, just wait, you won't.
It keeps our jobs, right?
This is very true. Certainly going to keep Jeannie Shanzano busy as well. Jeannie, if we consider everything, as Ashley is outlining, this incoming Congress is going to want to get done. We already discussed what is a very tight majority it's going to be in the House. In the Senate right now, the majority is 53, but there is a recount in Pennsylvania in the Dave McCormick, the Republican, versus the incumbent Democrat, Bob Casey race. Do you think there's potential this goes down to 52, or is that a recount going nowhere?
You know, historically, the recounts done in Pennsylvania, I think there were 4, and they have all gone the way that they were originally decided or initially decided. So my guess would be that it still remains with Dave McCormick, and Casey is going to have to concede. And, you know, while I do agree that Donald Trump may be throwing out a trial balloon on the recess or more likely to threaten the Senate, no president worth their salt is happy with the advice and consent of the Senate. They all want to get rid of it. Nobody wants to have to go to somebody else to do their job. So, you know, he doesn't want to have to go there. And I am waiting with bated breath because, Kaylee, remember when he said, Mike Johnson and I have a secret? And of course, that secret, is it the recess? I don't know, but the House Speaker has an enormous role potentially there. So, Haley, don't sleep this week and figure the secret out, would you?
I was told that the secret was teletown halls during the final stretch of the campaign for the House. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out later.
Probably wasn't even ever a secret. Who knows?
The secret will remain secret, perhaps. Ashley Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our wonderful political panel today. Thank you both so much for joining me, and enjoy the weekend. Certainly well-deserved for everyone who has had to keep track of what's going on here in Washington. We've talked a lot about what could happen in terms of the economic policy team, but we have to focus on the legal and justice team as well. Bloomberg's Sarah Forden is on her way in, and we'll have Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California as well on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. The Trump trade losing steam with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining. We are on track for a losing week. S&P on track right now for a drop this week of 2.2%. Today, we have got the S&P moving lower. The S&P now down by 1.4%, down 84 points. Dow Industrials are slumping 318 points now, down 0.7%. NASDAQ particularly hard hit, down now by 2.4%. The NASDAQ 100 index, full of those big tech names, down now by 2.5%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping 1.5%. The 10-year at 4.42%, with the 2-year currently yielding 4.28%. Gold just about flat on the day at $25.65 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.4%, $67.04 a barrel. Bitcoin now up 1.7%, 89,671 on Bitcoin. Sources tell Bloomberg General Motors will be cutting about 1,000 salaried workers globally in a move to streamline its operations. GM shares down now by about 0.5%. And New Jersey Congressman Josh Gottheimer has announced his run for governor of the state, joining a packed field of candidates jockeying to succeed term-limited Governor Phil Murphy next year. Again, recapping stocks lower, S&P down 1.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington, the Friday edition. And once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines. Thanks for being here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, where I have reminded you many times this hour, we're still awaiting some pretty important cabinet picks from the president-elect Donald Trump. Think Treasury or Commerce, roles that you might think would be pretty high on the checklist in terms of nominees you need to get out there. Maybe less so, lower down on the checklist you might expect would be, say, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. But that's what we got yesterday. Donald Trump has tapped Jay Clayton, the former SEC chair, for that role. He's also tapped a number of his personal attorneys to serve him in this upcoming administration. And of course, most of all, he has tapped former Congressman, now Matt Gaetz, to serve as Attorney General, though there's some pretty serious confirmation questions there. But we want to get into all of these questions and turn to Sarah Forden, who leads Bloomberg's legal coverage here in Washington, and she's joining me in our D.C. studio. So, Sarah, if we could start with Gaetz, because if confirmed, he would be running the entire Department of Justice. What would that actually look like? In what ways could he potentially dismantle the existing structure?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of coverage of Trump's angst about the Justice Department, the investigations, also dating back to the Russia investigation under the former leader of the FBI in that case. You know, the Justice Department includes the FBI, the Criminal Division, the Civil Division, the Human Rights Division. It's a massive law enforcement agency, and the aim is to whittle it down and to weed out anybody who isn't loyal to the president's agenda.
Well, of course, Matt Gaetz has argued that the Justice Department has been weaponized against him, and Donald Trump has argued the very same because he, of course, has been indicted by the DOJ, specifically Special Counsel Jack Smith, in 2 separate federal cases that he's now, Jack Smith that is, trying to wind down before Donald Trump takes office. How is that process likely to go? And is everyone who was involved in it going to have to leave the DOJ before Trump takes the oath?
Well, it's most likely that they will all leave ahead of time. And they're winding down the cases because they have a longstanding policy to not prosecute sitting presidents. So there's no, thinking to wait until Trump gets into office. You know, this is inevitable. These cases are going to go away. And so Jack Smith is preparing his filings to dismiss them. He's asked for a little more time to do that. This has now been postponed until December 2nd. And the issues are a little bit different in the 2 cases. So the January 6th case is about Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the election. Yeah. The Florida case is about his handling of classified documents. And that case was thrown out by federal judge Eileen Cannon, arguing that the special counsel, the DOJ wasn't authorized to appoint the special counsel. So that is an issue that Jack Smith wants to actually try to preserve, because for decades in this country, presidents and the Justice Department have appointed special counsels, going back to Nixon and before.
Or the one that investigated Hunter Biden, for example.
So this has been, very standard practice of law enforcement enforcement to put a special counsel in charge of a politically sensitive case. So Jack Smith and his team are going to try to argue that appeal in a way to protect and preserve that right.
Well, so that's that team, which was, of course, the prosecution team. Then there was the defense team for Donald Trump in all of these cases, his personal attorneys, some of which are now going to be having a role in his second administration.
Well, and these are people that really put out for Trump and really successfully got those cases delayed and delegitimized in the views of many. And so he's, in his loyalty principle, he's rewarding the people who came through for him. So Todd Blanche, Emil Bove, Dean John Sauer, all of these people are now going to be flanking him in his new administration.
I want to finally, Sarah, ask you about Jay Clayton as well, who, of course, is best known to our audience here as the former SEC chair. He's getting SDNY, so he's the cop literally on Wall Street. And I wonder what we should make of this pick. He was, I guess, involved in securities law, surely, but what about criminal law?
Well, exactly. I mean, he's a seasoned lawyer. He's, senior partner with Sullivan and Cromwell. He's part of the establishment. He's seen as more of an institutionalist than some of Trump's other picks. But at the same time, the whole criminal enforcement area is a brand new chapter for him. So it's going to be interesting to see how he's going to interpret this mandate. For example, SDNY, the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, has been famous for going after financial crime, insider trading, white-collar crime. So the question is, are the priorities of this office going to change? Are we going to see SDNY get involved in a push on the immigration agenda that the Trump administration has? So we're watching that very closely.
All right. Well, we look forward to the continued reporting from Sarah and her team on this. Bloomberg, Sarah Forden, thank you so much. And we want to get reaction as well from Capitol Hill to some of these conversations and others, and turn now to Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California, who is joining me live from the Hill here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Congressman, welcome back to Balance of Power. There's much I'd like to discuss with you, but would love for you to take a swing, as you do sit on the Financial Services Committee, about Jay Clayton being a different kind of cop for the financial world, potentially, in the second administration.
I think Clayton is one of the more reasonable picks for Donald Trump. I realize that isn't a real high standard, but I think he's an entirely reasonable pick to be the chief prosecutor in the nation's financial capital.
And what about the other picks that I feel like you are alluding to, sir?
Oh my God, Matt Gaetz, Attorney General. Wow. It is just stunningly bizarre, especially you'd think that Donald Trump, who says we should have openness with the American people, isn't demanding that the Ethics Committee investigation, which was supposed to report today and might still report today, that report isn't made public. How can we spend all this government money, have a Congress, which is a House of Representatives, which is in Republican hands, do a bipartisan, fair investigation, and then hide it from the American people? I think that's outrageous.
Well, I guess we'll see if that either leaks out or is formally issued, and we'll see whether or not Matt Gaetz ultimately is confirmed for that job, Congressman. I'd also like to ask you about a man with a job currently, and that is the Fed chair, Jay Powell, who has had to field questions about whether he would resign if asked by Donald Trump. He has stated it's not legal for Trump to demote him or anyone else in Fed leadership. But I wonder if you think those theories will be tested in this incoming administration.
I wouldn't put it past Trump to try to do things that he doesn't have the legal right to do. I'm counting on the court system to defend our laws, and I think Jay Powell will serve out his term.
Well, and he certainly has more work ahead of him just in the next couple of weeks, Congressman. There will be a rate decision. The market seems less convinced that they're actually going to cut rates again before the year is out. But do you believe the economy needs it?
Well, you've got to look at what the economy is going to be next year. Trump is proposing policies which, according to the Peterson Institute, are going to boost inflation between 4 and 7 percentage points. That's worse than COVID's effect on the inflation rate. And we would rely upon the Fed to somehow do its best to control inflation. Of course, higher interest rates are bad for consumers, just as inflation is bad for consumers.
Well, so I guess we'll see how the Fed navigates that next year. But before this year is over, Congressman. The government also needs to be funded. There's a deadline coming up for that as well in December. And I wonder if you think it's more likely we end up with a continuing resolution or an omnibus package.
Congress will tend to kick a can down the road. An omnibus is much more difficult to put together. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a continuing resolution until at least February. Republicans are talking about a continuing resolution all the way through the end of the fiscal year in September. And given how much I disagree with the things they would try to do in an appropriations bill, putting the government on automatic pilot is, it's not good, but it's not as bad as other things.
Well, try is an operative word there, sir. The votes will still be required, and it does seem that in the incoming Congress, it is going to be, once again, as we've experienced for the last 2 years, a very tight majority, especially with Donald Trump having pulled not just Gates, but 2 others out of the Republican conference for roles in the administration. Is there a way Democrats can use that to their advantage?
Well, in the Senate, they're going to keep the filibuster, and in the Senate, they have only a 3-vote margin. So, for example, if only 4 Republican senators will stand up and say, we can't vote on Matt Gaetz until we see the Ethics Committee report, then there'll be an important step for honesty with the American people, openness and on that nomination. I would suspect that they will not allow, for example, Stefanik to take her role as UN ambassador until such time as they've had special elections to fill other seats. They can't operate with no, with a 1-seat majority. And we'll see how the elections come out. I think the ones in California that are still uncalled are going to go our way.
Well, I'm glad you raised Elise Stefanik, sir. She, of course, as you alluded to, tapped as ambassador for the United Nations. We also saw former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee tapped as ambassador to Israel. And I wonder what that says to you about the way in which Israel policy could look different as we move forward into this next administration.
I think Stefanik will do a good job, probably in the mold of Nikki Haley. I think Huckabee has gone way too far and will lead Israel in the wrong direction. Israel may be able to take extreme positions and still remain popular in the Republican Party of the United States. But there are 8 billion people on this planet, and if Israel only has the support of Israelis, or a majority of Israelis, and a majority of Republicans, then Israel is isolated from the rest of the world. The fact is that Israel's 76 years old. During its first half of existence, Democrats and Republicans were in control about half the time, and that'll be true the next 76 years. And if Israel puts itself in a position where it has no appeal to those to the left of Donald Trump, that's a terrible position for Israel to be in.
Congressman, we just have a minute or two left here. The Washington Post reported this week that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is preparing a ceasefire in Lebanon as a quote-unquote gift to the incoming president, Donald Trump. Do you think that is actually achievable before he takes office?
I think if Hezbollah will follow the UN resolution, usually UN resolutions aren't particularly good for Israel, but will follow UN resolution and move north of the Litani River, as they agreed to do decades ago, or over a decade ago, that we should get a ceasefire. And I don't think we should continue killing people unnecessarily on either side just to make a gift to an incoming U.S. administration. Israel should conclude a ceasefire when it can do so in a way that will keep its northern Israelis safe. And that is pretty much a decision Hezbollah has to make. Are they willing to do what they agreed to do over a decade ago and move north of the Litani River?
All right, Congressman, appreciate your time on this Friday. Sir, enjoy the weekend. That is Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California, member of the House Foreign Affairs and Financial Services Committee, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. And we'll have much more ahead in the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg. It's, of course, at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're hoping we might have some news by then around the economic selections of Donald Trump. We're still waiting for Treasury Secretary, the National Economic Council, the Council of Economic Advisors. Sources telling Bloomberg this hour that Larry Kudlow has taken himself out of contention for any of those roles, but we're still waiting to learn more. So join us again later on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. It is a Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenevec, along with Jess Menton of Bloomberg News. Carol Masser is off today on this Friday, November 15th, 2025. Jess, stocks are sliding. The Trump trade seeming to lose a little steam. Investors betting the Fed will have to slow the pace of policy easing.
That's right. So it's going to be an important day, especially because the S&P 500 on pace for that weekly decline, but the NASDAQ 100 also on pace for decline, but only its second in the past 10 weeks, Tim.
Okay, we'll have much more on the markets and the trade in just a minute. And on that path of rates, we're going to hear from Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee in just a minute. He's sitting down with Michael McKee.
That's right. And of course, we have to point out what's happening with pharmaceutical stocks today, making really big moves here. So falling for a second day in a row, Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, of course, all eyes to keep on that, all lower right now after President-elect Donald Trump said he is tapping Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to run the Department of Health and Human Services. How his views could face scrutiny during confirmation hearing is big on our list here, Tim.
Also, speaking of the Trump trade, it's Friday, so we get options insight with Abigail Doolittle. Talking a little bit about what's next now that the rally has lost a little steam. All that and more coming up over the next hour right here on Bloomberg Business Week. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We're looking at a down Friday here, down week as well. Running the function on the Bloomberg, looking at a loss for the S&P this week of 2.27% as we stand right now. Lows of the day, just about the lows of the day on the S&P. Stocks declining as Trump trades lose steam, and investors bet the Fed will have to slow the pace of policy easing. So the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Tech stocks particularly hard hit. Going to begin with the NASDAQ 100 index, now down by 2.6%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 2.5%, down 482 right now. S&P, to put it all in context, down 89, down 1.5%. And we've got the Dow down 0.8%, down 346 points. Your 10-year at 4.40% with the 2-year 4.26%. Spot gold, little change, not doing much of anything today, up 0.1%, 25.67 the ounce on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.5%, 67 even a barrel. Bitcoin continuing to monitor that, up 1.4%, 89,474 on Bitcoin. Retail sales advanced in October, boosted by a jump in auto purchases, while other categories signaled some momentum entering into the holiday shopping season. Mixed day for a lot of the retail names. Walmart up 0.1%. Amazon hard hit though, part of a broader tech sell-off, down 4.6%. Target down 0.1%. Macy's now lower by just about 1%. Representative Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey has announced his run for governor of the state, joining a packed field of candidates jockeying to succeed term-limited Governor Phil Murphy next year. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Really do appreciate it. Tim Stanovic and Jess Madden live in the Bloomberg Business Week studio here in New York. Well, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston President Susan Collins said earlier on Bloomberg TV that a December interest rate cut remains on the table, emphasizing the central bank's decision will be guided by incoming data. For more on the path of rates and how another Fed president is thinking about the environment right now, we head on over to Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee, who's standing by with Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee. Hey, Mike.
Good afternoon, Tim, and good afternoon to everybody watching around the world on Bloomberg Television and radio. Through the miracle of modern telecommunications, I'm in Boston, where I did talk with Susan Collins earlier today, and Austin is in Chicago, where he is making some of the media rounds. Austin, thanks for joining us today. You saw, you heard...
got to get you out here to Chicago.
Exactly. But you just heard them say that the markets are down today. There's a little bit of disappointment because there's a feeling that with reasonably strong inflation and kind of strong economy and mixed news on the labor markets, that the Fed might take a Santa pause, take a pause in December. Do you want to make everybody happy and tell them that that's not going to happen?
Look, you know my thing is, A, I'm only allowed to speak for myself, not for anybody else on the committee or for the committee as a whole. And B, I don't like tying our hands. We're going to still get a lot of information and data before the next meeting when we have to decide that. And we're going to get to discuss amongst ourselves, and I'm going to hear the views of other folks on the committee. I know the market's business model is to react immediately and in the most extreme terms to rumors, and that's not the Fed timetable. What we need to do as a central bank, I think, is focus on the through line, and the through line has been substantial decrease in the inflation rate from its highs, the job market cooling to something like full employment, where if it stayed right where it was, that would be a perfectly fine, steady state outcome. And to do that and hold it in that kind of position, I think we're going to be looking at rates coming down over the next year along the lines of what the dot plot said. So I still think we have a long way to go down with rates. How fast that happens, you saw Chair Powell saying that there's nothing that says it has to be immediate. And I'm comfortable personally that if there's some dispute about what is the neutral rate at which we're going to settle down, if there's disagreement about that we don't just charge right to it, that we slow the pace as we get toward it. But again, this is playing out over a longer period, I think.
Well, everybody came out of the last meeting, everybody on Wall Street came out of the last meeting, figuring that the December meeting was a sure thing for another rate cut. Have you seen anything in the data we got this past week that seems to have upset people on Wall Street that would cause you to think there should be a pause? Or are you still fairly confident that it's a necessary and a possible move?
Well, the second part of that, I always think, you've seen the table, it's a huge table, everything's always on the table. But there are no guarantees, and there shouldn't be. We should be watching the conditions. I'm not going to try to put my head into how dangerous is it to try to put your head into what the market is thinking. I've just got to focus on what I'm thinking. We've seen,
what is Austin thinking?
In the job market, conflicting crosswinds, let's call it. We had a disappointing month. We had 2 stronger than expected months. Then we had a hurricane and strike noise affected month that was well below what was expected. We just need to see through that and try to figure out where we are in the job market. A lot of the other measures, if you take the unemployment rate, if you take some of the ratios like vacancies to the number of unemployed workers, they're pointing to stabilization at something like full employment. That would be great. The inflation numbers have to keep improving. I believe that we have set out a path to 2%. If we started to see reversal of that, then we're going to be back into the phase where we got to figure out, is this a bump in the road like it was in January of this year, or is this through line continuing? And
is that what you're seeing right now?
A lot changed in the last couple of weeks on that.
Is that what you're seeing now with inflation as a bump in the road, the CPI, PPI, and what the nerds have figured out for PCE coming up?
Well, the nerds, I love those nerds. A bunch of those nerds work at Chicago Fed. It's a little higher, on a monthly basis than the target. If that was extended, that's too high. The inflation target's 2%. We're going to get inflation at 2%. If it's coming in at 3%, it has to come down. Now, that said, absolutely don't make too much out of any 1 month's number, especially on inflation. There's a lot of volatility of that series, and we've had many months in a row that the through line on inflation, in my view, is it's come way down and it's going to keep coming down. I have some confidence that if you break out the components, you're starting to finally see progress on the housing side. We've had a bit of a bump/blip where goods inflation has gone back up above 0, where pre-COVID it was mild deflation. So I still think you can see some progress on that, and we'll keep an eye on the services.
This morning you were quoted as saying by this time next year we'll see interest rates far below where they are today. What does far below mean? Is your view of neutral significantly lower than we are now?
It's significantly lower than where we are now, definitely. I mean, I don't think it's a secret. If you take the dot plot SEPs, it looked like a pretty wide consensus among the members of the committee, where they're asked individually, we don't debate those points, that almost everyone views that the long-run settling rate of interest rates is somewhere well below where it is today. So that's why I say, as long as we're staying on this path that we've been on, I view that interest rates need to come down a fair amount over the next 12 to 18 months.
But given the growth rate, Atlanta Fed GDP now out today 2.6%, and what we've seen the rest of this year, it's been stronger than anticipated. Inflation's a little higher than anticipated. Unemployment a little lower than anticipated. Is it worth keeping your foot on the brake a little longer to try to ensure you get to that target you want?
I mean, it's for sure keeping an eye on those conditions. If you thought the economy's overheating and that we're getting off the through line of improvement and going to an overheated posture, the Fed has to, we committed, we're going to get inflation back to 2%. Now, I think the question mark to remember on all of this is we've had very robust productivity growth now for a year plus. And if productivity growth is higher than trend, as it has been, and that continues, then you got to be a little careful over-indexing on the growth rate of GDP as an indicator of whether the economy is overheating. Because if productivity is rising, you can have faster growth without generating more inflation.
I know there's some topics that Fed officials don't like to talk about, including the state of the Chicago Bears these days, but we have a new administration
That's
coming.
That's cold. You're not even here. You're over there in Boston staying this. I'm going to get you, Mike.
We have a new administration coming in, and obviously it's going to bring in some new fiscal programs. I realize you don't have details. You can't model them. You're not sure. But could you basically say that whatever kind of SEP we get in December, summary of economic projections, whatever kind of dot plot, we shouldn't put too much emphasis on it because it could easily change when the new administration takes over?
Maybe. I don't totally know how to answer that. I thought Chair Powell at the press conference had a lovely phrase that when it comes to policy, we don't speculate. It's not our job to try to make predictions about who's going to win elections or what are they going to do. Our job is to follow the dual mandate, maximize employment, stabilize prices. If policies get enacted that we think are going to affect our mandate, of course we react to those conditions just like every other conditions, but we're not in the elections business or the anticipation of policy business of that form.
Well, you did serve in an administration as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and now you work for the Fed. From your perspective, what should be the relationship between an executive administration and the central bank?
Look, I said before I ever was at the Fed that Fed independence is important, and that's close to unanimously held view among economists because the simple reason, just look around the world and look at times in the United States when a sitting administration can bully the Fed or tell the Fed what to do or the central bank what to do on interest rates, the outcomes are worse. Inflation is higher, the economic growth is lower, and that's why everybody thinks that the Fed's independence is important. And it's an interesting observation. I was the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. There are many previous people that worked at the Council of Economic Advisors or in high-level Treasury roles who work in the Fed because they have public sector experience. But the question of Fed independence, and it's embodied in the Federal Reserve Act, they try to set it up to be as insulated from elections as possible. It's not on the presidential election timetable for the terms. There's a composition of the FOMC, some of which are political appointees, some of which are from reserve banks around the country that are not chosen through a political process. And that's how it should be if you want to do the best monetary policy, I think.
I guess I'm going to ask a question that I sort of asked before, but in a different way. Back a couple of years ago, Lael Brainerd put forth the proposition that maybe you want to have a slow period of policy taking breaks in between meetings where you might raise or lower interest rates because you have to assess where the economy is. Because we don't know what's going to happen with fiscal policy and because we're getting a little bit of extra strength in the economy, Do you think that that is probably a good idea, that maybe we don't price in regular rate cuts, that you do take some breaks in between?
Well, first, I thought you were about to say, I thought you were going to quote me something you asked me 2 years ago, and I was going to say I don't remember that. But so you asked Vice Chair Brainerd. The Fed's decision making is not based on the results of elections. Our decision is based on the dual mandate and the assessment of the economic conditions and the outlook. If the outlook is changing, then we can balance and think through what that means for the Fed. But the part of the question that I object to, it's not speculating about fiscal policy. That's not the Fed's role. We're the Midwest. You tell us the weather, and we tell you what jacket we're going to put on. But that goes into the economic conditions, and what we do is watch economic conditions. I'm perfectly comfortable, personally, with the idea that if you look at the dot plot, there is disagreement about what will the ultimate settling rate be of R star, if you want to call it that, or what would it mean to stop being restrictive and start being neutral. And if we're getting closer to the disagreement point, I can understand why you would want to slow down a little bit to try to gauge, is this neutral or are we still restrictive? Because monetary policy has a lag in its impact. And in my view, that's the way we should be managing this question of how slow or how fast to do it.
Well, let me ask you one last question, and that is, you mentioned you're in the Midwest. You can tell us what kind of coat you're wearing. Probably the same as us today. It's cold in Boston. But what are CEOs and consumers telling you out there? I know you're not just looking at past data when you make your decisions. You try to incorporate current views of the economy. So what are the views of the people in your district?
Well, out here in the heartland, you know, in the reserve banks, we spend a lot of time going and talking to business leaders and community leaders and consumers and getting more up-to-date measures than just what come out in official data. A lot of the discussion, and we have a special focus on autos and manufacturing here in the 7th District because we have the most auto production of all the districts by far. Most of the business community are reporting back a steady as she goes kind of a report, and that the job market, it's not easy to find people, but it's not the kind of labor shortage, labor scarcity mentality that they had coming out of peak pandemic. On the inflation side, a lot of discussion, really complaints on the part of the business people that they cannot raise prices as much as they did before. They can't pass on cost increases, fear that there might be some cost increases coming, complications in the supply chain, et cetera, and that now consumers would not stand for passing those costs on. So all of those don't tell a story to me that's that different from what the data have been showing, which is this steady progress on the inflation front, stabilization on employment, and steady as she goes. Let's try to bring the interest rate down into something like neutral and be a little less restrictive.
You've been in Chicago for a long time, but now you're at the Chicago Fed, which encompasses the city of Detroit. If the Lions win out, is that good enough for you?
That's good enough for me. We got a branch in Detroit. We got a bomb dog in Detroit who sidelights as the bomb dog at the Detroit Lions Stadium. So we're all Lions. That'd be okay. Almost as good as the Bears.
Austin Goolsbee, the president of the Chicago Fed and the owner of a bomb dog in Detroit. Thanks for joining us today here on Bloomberg. And I'll send it back to you guys in New York.
Hey, thanks so much, Michael McKee, bomb dogs and the dot plot. Michael McKee, Bloomberg News International Economic and Policy Correspondent. Out there in Boston, though, speaking with Austin Goolsbee out in Chicago, the president of the Chicago Fed. Lots of headlines there, Jess Menton. Austin Goolsbee sees rates coming down along the lines of the dot plot. The Fed may slow the pace of rate cuts as it nears neutral. And if current rate of inflation extended, it's too high.
And also, he was bringing up the debate, an ongoing debate, as we know when it comes to R-Star, where the neutral rate sits, because earlier this year, you still had Raphael Bostic as well as Patrick Harker arguing that the neutral rate was closer to 3%, but now some of them have come out and said that could be potentially higher than that, just depending on where policy goes in the next year, too. But also him staying a little bit mum, Tim, when it comes to the fiscal side of what's happening with Washington, hammering home how the Fed's dual mandate is still watching that price stability and maximum employment.
Yeah, he said we're not in the anticipation of anticipating the policy platform, but if policies get enacted that will affect our mandate, we of course will react to those. Kind of repeating what he heard from and what we heard from Jay Powell last week at the press conference. Also, some interesting anecdotal comments coming from the Chicago area. He said that most of the business communities reporting back a steady as she goes kind of report not easy to find people when it comes to labor, but not the kind of labor scarcity that we had coming out of the peak pandemic. But business leaders are saying, hey, we can't raise prices as much as we could before, so they don't have the same pricing power.
Something that piqued my interest was actually when you brought up what was happening with productivity, because we did hear other officials this week, like Neil Kashkari, arguing that whether or not if we saw higher productivity, that might slow the pace of rate cuts next year, depending on what that would mean for GDP. But he was actually arguing that sometimes you can have higher productivity, but not necessarily have GDP growth overheating the economy, and you can still have generating faster growth in the economy without higher inflation. That was a little bit of a different perspective there than some of the other officials this week, Tim.
Lots of Fed speak to parse through. Hey, but the market's not closed yet, so let's go and get an update from Charlie Pellet, who's got an update on where the markets are and some business news. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Tim and Jess. Lower across the board right now for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ on track for a losing week. This week, the S&P down by more than 2%. Right to the numbers, because we have got the S&P slumping as Trump trades lose steam. S&P now down 91, a drop right now of 1.5%. The Dow down 350, down 0.8%. NASDAQ particularly hard hit today, down 488 points, down 2.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 2.65%. And the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping now by 1.7%. Your 10-year, 4.41%. The 2-year, 4.28%. Gold just about flat on the day, up under $1 the ounce to $25.65. West Texas Intermediate crude, 67.12 a barrel, down 2.3%. And Bitcoin up 1.5%, 89,540 on Bitcoin. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee mentioned his district and the importance of the automakers during the conversation with Mike McKee. Today, sources told Bloomberg General Motors will be cutting about 1,000 salaried workers globally in a move to streamline its operations. GM shares right now down by about 0.5%. So again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 90, down 1.5% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Well, shares of vaccine makers such as Novavax, Moderna, Pfizer down yet again today. This after they fell yesterday on news that President-elect Donald Trump said he's tapping Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to run the Department of Health and Human Services. It's a move that would elevate a prominent vaccine skeptic and pharmaceutical industry critic to a top role on federal health policy. For more, we bring in Gregory Cordy. He's Bloomberg News senior White House and politics correspondent. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Gregory, the HHS oversees 13 divisions. It includes the CDC, the NIH, the FDA. We're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars here. What impact could RFK Jr. have on this part of the government?
Yeah, it's a sprawling federal bureaucracy, and it has its tentacles all over the Washington region, but also, as you mentioned, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, the Food and Drug Administration. What people are focusing most on in the immediate aftermath of this potential nomination is the vaccine companies, and we're seeing, Moderna, I'm looking at down 7% today, a little bit up from its low, taking perhaps one of the hardest hits. But it's really across the industry. Kennedy has talked about, everything from vaccine safety, pharmaceuticals, but also even the food coloring that we put in children's cereals. And so if he takes the regulatory reins of this agency, which has huge influence over our food and drug supply, it could have far-reaching impacts. He's talking about, the fluoridation of water, something that we've taken for granted since the 1940s or 50s to prevent tooth decay, talking about raw milk, which he's an advocate for. So we really fundamentally rethinking our food supply in the United States.
And Trump has said before that after the election that he would give Kennedy full reign over health policy. And even before Trump was elected, and you even alluded to this too, Kennedy said he would recommend water agencies to stop adding fluoride to drinking water. Would he have the power to make things like that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's been so far out of the realm of discussion for the past 7 decades that it's really kind of hard to get a handle on that. The fluoridation is done, largely through municipal water supplies. I'm not clear on how much influence the federal government has over that, other than maybe setting some safety standards. There are some studies that say that fluoride in very high doses could have some adverse health effects, but nothing near the levels that are typically in water. But I think, to go to your point, like, this is such a fundamental rethinking of things that we thought we knew about health and science that had been well settled for decades now, potentially rethinking at the beginning of a first Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that he talks about that certainly goes against conventional medical science, and no question against what scientists have been saying for years, Gregory. But there's also some stuff that's pretty basic when it comes to health, like he likes to talk about exercising a lot, eating less processed foods. So his views, I think, really run the gamut. But I'm wondering what you've heard so far from senators, if this nomination does indeed happen, and if he goes in front of the Senate for a hearing, is this the type of person who senators would approve in your view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a big question, but this nomination comes amid a number of controversial nominations, including Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, Pete Hegseth as the chief at the Pentagon. And so I think there's a sense of bewilderment on Capitol Hill right now, especially among Democrats, but even many Republicans trying to figure out, how many of these nominees they can afford to vote against without alienating the future president of the United States, how they play those chips. And then we have the question of recess appointments. The President-elect Trump says he wants the Senate to basically go out of session and turn its back while he appoints people like Kennedy and Gaetz and Hegseth to these prominent positions without having to seek confirmation by the Senate. And that would be a very provocative move. And so we heard from the future majority leader of the Republican Senate on Fox News last night saying he's open to that idea, but it would still have a lot of obstacles if the opposition continues to mount to some of these Trump nominees among Republicans. They not only won't want to vote for Kennedy or Gaetz or whoever it is, but they won't want to go into recess to let the president-elect do it through the back door.
Why are senators who, maybe some of them whom just got reelected or elected, why are they so concerned about alienating a president who, at this point, we know is done after 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, but it's one that we have been asking for the past 8 years, right, about Trump's grip on the Republican Party and on Republican lawmakers. Certainly, I think that grip has always been a little tighter in the House than the Senate. Senators are elected to 6-year terms, and so the senators that are coming in, this freshman crop of senators, on the one hand, they owe their election to the Senate to Trump's coattails. On the other hand, by the time they have to seek re-election in the year 2030, Trump will have gone from the national stage. And so that's exactly the question that I think a lot of senators are asking themselves is, how much freedom do I have? How much leeway do I have to push back against who is the leader of the Republican Party?
And Kennedy has said that he wants to overhaul the Health and Human Services staff. What exactly could his plans be for that, and who would be ousted?
Yeah, so, obviously that includes a lot of heads of these 13 sub-agencies that Tim was talking about, but also a large number, outside of Washington in Bethesda, there's the National Institutes of Health, which includes a lot of scientists. That's where Anthony Fauci came from, who was the sort of the vaccine czar during the coronavirus epidemic. There's a lot of skepticism from the American right about those scientists. And so I think there's a lot of technical experts, not just in HHS, but probably in a lot of different areas of government that are now reconsidering their careers and deciding whether they would want to retire, resign, do something else or risk being fired by the next administration if, and again, this is a big if somebody like Kennedy were to be nominated. That's not a done deal yet. We may end up with a somewhat more conventional nominee. But on the other hand, we also have, at the same time, remember, we have Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy appointed to this Doge Commission to look at vastly reducing the size and scope of the federal government. So even if it doesn't come from Kennedy's scalpel, it might come from a machete from Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's a point that I think I don't know has maybe been lost on a lot of people. So let's talk a little bit about that. What power would those two individuals have to actually cut government spending by such a significant degree? I mean, Elon Musk bought Twitter a couple of years ago, fired a bunch of engineers. It still works. That's his own company. That's a private company. You can't really do that with the federal government, Gregory.
Well, it's been tried before, but by much more conventional means. You know, I'm a veteran of the Simpson-Bowles Commission, of the so-called Congressional Super Committee. There have been a lot of attempts over the decades to find some sort of mechanism to find massive savings in the federal government to help balance the budget. It never works because each one of these programs in the government has some sort of political constituency. And it's really hard to get the political will to make the cuts that, frankly, most people in Washington would concede need to happen. There needs to be some sort of fundamental restructuring of our income to our spending. And so here you come to entrepreneurs who frankly are oblivious to the political implications of this, who just see what they see as a massively bloated federal bureaucracy and would use very crude means to just cut it. Now, all of that, still, they're working from outside of the government, and so it's going to take President Trump to accept those recommendations, whatever they are, and get them through Congress. Now, there's a whole other discussion about whether the president can do this unilaterally. That's a discussion perhaps for another day. But no one's quite sure what to make of this. It certainly has big ambitions, but it's still unclear exactly how it would work when Elon Musk comes to Washington and the real politics of making such big cuts.
Another segment, as you know, that could be impacted is the Food and Drug Administration, as well as drug makers. Kennedy has talked about how he wants to eliminate liability protections for drug companies. How do you think this will affect the FDA as well as drug makers?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that caught a lot of people's eyes last night when President Trump made this announcement that he was going to nominate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the HHS post was not just what he said about Kennedy, but what he said about the sort of the health establishment. And he called these agencies deceptive. He said they were full of disinformation. And it was really the sort of the biggest broadside that we've heard from President-elect Trump against this industry, really, for an awful long time. Remember, as president, he was president during the coronavirus the pandemic, and was behind the Operation Warp Speed to bring many of these same vaccines to market that now Kennedy is very skeptical of. Now, that's your question is, let's broaden this to other drugs, other segments, and that's what we're seeing is not just these vaccine companies, but across the S&P Health Index, we're seeing broad declines today because this does have tentacles into other sort of pharmaceuticals.
Do you think there are many career, I know bureaucrats is a dirty word, but there are many career employees who work in the National Institute of Health, the FDA, people whose job it is to essentially be regulators or to do scientific research. I wonder to what extent a pick such as this might alienate those folks and drive them on their own outside of the administration, even before something like this goes into effect, just the change in attitude there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that remains to be seen. Remember, these would largely be people who stuck around during the first Trump administration, betting that Trump would come and go and they would maybe have a more friendly administration to the kinds of research and regulation that they were doing in the federal government. Now here comes a second Trump administration that seems to have even bigger ambitions to not only reduce the size of government, but to reduce the regulations that these civil servants are responsible for. So it remains to be seen whether they will wait to quit or be fired. You know, the other sort of X factor here that might be in play is, remember, we had a pandemic. A lot of us went to go work from home. You and I are back in the office. A lot of federal employees are not. They have been working remotely for the past 4 years. And so how that has subtly changed maybe the culture of some of these departments and how these civil servants relate to their work, I think might be a factor in how many decide to stick around the next administration.
That's a good point. We also know that Elon Musk, not a big fan of people working from home. We saw what he did to the folks out at the company formerly known as Twitter when they weren't coming into the office. You're listening to and watching a Bloomberg Business Week. Up next, it's the CFO Briefing.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks again trading near session lows. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining. Right now looking at a 92-point drop on the S&P 500 index, down by about 1.5%. The Dow down 363, down 0.8%, while NASDAQ is down 487 points now, a decline of 2.5%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down 1.6%. The 10-year 4.41%, with the 2-year 4.28%. Gold little changed and lower, down $1 the ounce to $25.63, while West Texas Intermediate crude is down 2.5%, right above 67 a barrel, 67.03 on WTI. Bitcoin up 2.3% right now, back above 90,000. Bitcoin now at 90,260. After earnings, Applied Materials shares are slumping 8.8%. It gave a disappointing revenue forecast, signaling that some semiconductor customers may be holding off on orders. Representative Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey has announced his run for governor, joining a packed field of candidates jockeying to succeed term-limited Governor Phil Murphy next year. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Do appreciate it. Well, so much happening right now that the C-suite we know is focused on. Companies all over the country and indeed all over the world. A new administration coming in January, figuring out what tariffs and trade will look like, trying to parse through those names that have been announced as the transition team makes its way to Washington. We talked a lot about that last week. Perhaps, though, about ESG and sustainability initiatives for companies, how those look under the next administration, especially one that denies climate change even exists. Nina Tretman is a Bloomberg News senior editor who writes the weekly CFO Briefing newsletter. You can sign up for that at Bloomberg.com/CFO Briefing. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. We're also joined right now by Deanna Strable, the CEO and formerly CFO of Principal Financial Group. She joins us from Iowa. Nina, I want to start with you and just get an understanding from you about how you're thinking about the CFO Briefing newsletter this week ahead of COP.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. One thing that we'll look at in the upcoming edition is specifically this: how do companies navigate this? That we have COP29, who's just going on in Azerbaijan. We also have the new administration getting ready here in the U.S., and of course the contrast couldn't be starker. And companies are in the middle ground there, sort of trying to navigate climate change, which increasingly we all feel. And the realities of this new administration. And so we are speaking to CFOs about this in the new upcoming edition of the CFO Briefing. We're talking to them about sort of how do they figure out new reporting requirements. There's new regulation taking place in the EU, for example, on that. We're also talking to them about net zero and why those goals are trickier to achieve than you might think. Then also we're talking to them about sustainability financing and the fact that sort of as debt markets around the world have been pretty busy this year. We've also seen an increase in that. Interestingly, the Americas are sort of lagging behind Europe and Asia and Pacific regions there. So, why don't we bring in Deanna? Thanks for joining us again. It was great to talk earlier this week. Could you talk a little bit to us about how Principal is navigating that challenge that I just described earlier?
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's great to be with you today. One of the things is I was just announced earlier this week as moving from the CFO position to our CEO-elect position, with that taking over in early 2025. For those of you that don't know, Principal is a global financial services company across retirement, asset management, and workplace benefits. But specifically, you talked about just the time that we're in regarding both just the election and some of the uncertainty around that, as well as the ESG and the sustainability journey. I think the good news on both fronts is, we have navigated for 145 years over a lot of different regimes, a lot of different agendas regarding these topics. And ultimately, we come back to doing what we think is right for our clients and right for our customers and employees, and ultimately feel that in doing that, we'll navigate these uncertain waters in a very effective way. But would love to go deeper if you want to dive a little deeper into those items.
Yeah, definitely do that, Deanna, because I know that Principal sold its first sustainability bond back in 2021, and you were considering potentially doing so again if any sort of good opportunities arise. So talk more about why you feel this is the right thing to do and what opportunities you might see again to jump back in.
Yeah, we did, as you mentioned, issue our first sustainable bond a few years ago. And ultimately, it is still something that we assess whenever we're facing an opportunity where we need to refinance a current debt or issue a new one. And so, again, we do have a debt that matures in 2025. We've made no decisions whether we will reissue from a sustainability perspective or not. But it is one thing that we'll assess. And really what comes into it is thinking about, obviously, economics, but also investor demand, and ultimately how that fits into the landscape of when we are issuing. And so more to come on that, but we are very pleased with our issuance that we have. Had great client interest in that or investor interest in that, and we'll continue to assess that as we move forward.
One follow-up from me. You talked about your clients and what's right for your clients. What are you hearing from clients, sort of thinking about U.S. clients, but also those in Europe? Like, where do they stand on this topic?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we are an asset manager and we have clients and customers around the globe. I think the first thing I would say is every client is different. There is some regional geographic differences. Obviously, sustainability and ESG has been something much higher on the priority of the European clients and investors. But even within any geography, there are clients that ultimately have either a higher or a lower sensitivity to that. And so ultimately, we're going to really take seriously our fiduciary responsibility to our clients, and acting in their best interest comes first and foremost. And so if you look across our asset management solutions, we have a wide range of choice there that can really resonate with that different landscape that we see amongst our client base.
How is demand right now for that type of asset or that type of offering, Deanna? Because it seems, at least many Americans, that's not necessarily on their radar right now, given what we saw at the polls last week. It's not like this is 2021 and this is top of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I don't think it's a broad base that there's no one in the U.S. that is interested in that. And so again, I just come back to ultimately we listen to the clients and we're able to meet their needs, whether that's high on their priority list or lower. But I do think given